2 days before Christmas in the peaceful town of Ellington, Connecticut, Birchview Drive was adorned with holiday decorations and wrapped gifts, creating a serene atmosphere. However, that calm was abruptly interrupted when a house alarm started ringing, prompting the police to respond quickly. When they arrived, they discovered smoke, a man bound to a chair, and something alarming in the basement. Initially, it appeared to be a burglary, but as detectives began their investigation, inconsistencies emerged. Eventually, a seemingly ordinary fitness tracker would uncover a shocking truth that no one anticipated. Connie DeBate, born on July 31, 1976, in Rockville, Connecticut, Connie was loved by all who knew her. She was raised by her parents, Kenneth and Cindy Stewart Margada, alongside her siblings Marlise, Leslie, and Keith. Connie's childhood in the peaceful towns of Vernon and Ellington was filled with deep friendships. After graduating from Ellington High in 1995, she attended the University of Connecticut and earned her degree in 1999. Connie went on to have a successful career in pharmaceutical sales in Reckitt Benckiser. Her friends remember her as kind, selfless, and vibrant, someone who brightened every room she entered. In the early 2000s, Connie met Richard DeBate, who born just 2 days before her on July 29, 1976. Richard was charming and motivated, with a background in computer network administration. They fell in love and got married on July 4, 2003. Soon after, they welcomed 2 sons, Richard R.J. and Connor. They then moved into a lovely home on Birchview Drive in Ellington. To outsiders, they appeared to be a perfect family. Connie was a caring mother, and Richard seemed to be a devoted husband. However, the reality behind closed doors was starting to show signs of trouble. On December 23, 2015, just 2 days before Christmas, a tragic event occurred. The day started like any other. At 8:10 a.m., Richard dropped the boys off at the bus stop while Connie was getting ready for a class at the local gym. Shortly after she left, Richard realized he had forgotten his work laptop and went back home. He reported that this was the moment everything changed. Richard told the police that he received a security alert on his phone about an alarm going off at their house. He emailed his boss to explain his delay and quickly returned home. When he got inside, he claimed he heard noises coming from upstairs. As he went to check, he said he encountered a masked intruder in camouflage who was holding a knife. According to Richard, chaos erupted when a man entered their home demanding money and passwords, threatening to harm his family. Just then, the garage door opened. Connie had returned early because her class was canceled. Richard shouted a warning, but the intruder ran toward Connie, leading to a struggle. Richard was thrown down the stairs and became dazed. When he regained his senses and went after them into the basement, it was already too late. He heard the gunshot. The attacker then turned on Richard, tied him to a folding chair with zip tied, cut him with a box cutter. However, Richard managed to fight back, frightened the man away. The story was dramatic, but the timeline raised some questions. Richard reported that the attack occurred around 9:05 a.m., but the first 911 call was made over an hour later, at 10:21. When first responders arrived, they noticed smoke in the air and the front door slightly ajar. They followed a trail of blood from the basement to the kitchen, where they discovered Richard, partially restrained and lying face down. However, there was no evidence of the supposed intruder. Investigators conducted a thorough search of the home, taking photographs of everything, including Richard still tied to the chair. As they examined the scene more closely, they found themselves with increasing questions. Initially, it appeared to be the aftermath of a violent struggle, but some details were inconsistent. Richard had zip-tied only on his left wrist and ankle, his injuries were minimal, and the location of his wound raised suspicions. Meanwhile, the real tragedy unfolded in the basement boiler room, where police discovered Connie. She had sustained 2 fatal gunshot wounds, one to her abdomen and another to the back of her head. Unfortunately, there was no hope for her. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators quickly recognized that this was not just a standard home invasion case. They dispatched service dog units to try to track the intruder. Surprisingly, the dogs focused their attention on one individual, Richard. One of the dogs discovered Richard's wallet in the yard, which had likely been discarded by the escaping intruder. However, there was no scent trail leading away from the house. Instead, the dogs followed a path directly to the ambulance where Richard was being treated for what turned out to be only minor injuries. From that moment on, Richard's story started to fall apart. At Hartford Hospital, detectives questioned him about what happened that morning. Richard stuck to his story that an intruder shot Connie, but when they asked for more details, his account started to change. His timeline became unclear. At one point, Richard said he left the house before Connie, but later he couldn't remember who left first. He also altered his description of returning home. Initially, he claimed he heard no sounds upstairs, but then he said he went upstairs after seeing a bedroom light and found a man going through a closet. There were several inconsistencies in Richard's account. Initially, he stated that he was pushed down the stairs, but later changed his story to say he fell. He described a struggle between Connie and the intruder over a gun, claiming the intruder overpowered her and shot her. Richard also claimed that the basement was completely dark, making it difficult to see. However, if he had been knocked unconscious as he stated, how could he remember so many details? Additionally, the physical evidence did not support Richard's story. He claimed he crawled up the stairs while still tied to a chair to call for help, but his injuries were only on the left side and the front of his legs, areas that were easily accessible with his right hand. There was another issue to consider. There was hardly any blood trail leading from the basement to the kitchen. Investigators found only a few dry drops of blood in the kitchen, which raised questions. If Richard had truly dragged himself upstairs, he would have left a more obvious trail. Even more concerning was what they didn't discover. There was no evidence that Richard had approached Connie's body after the shooting. The blood around her remained undisturbed, suggesting that no one attempted to assist her. Detectives also looked at the supposed entry point, a basement window, which showed no signs of forced entry. Instead, the locks were found removed from the inside and placed on the sill. For someone to enter in that manner, they would need to pry open the window without damaging the frame or triggering the alarm system, which seemed unlikely. When asked more questions, Richard described his marriage as mostly positive. He acknowledged that Connie had been going through emotional challenges, showing signs of depression and occasional anger, which was unusual for her since she is generally warm and optimistic. He indicated that she was gradually improving. However, when asked if investigators would find any relationship problems, Richard provided a confusing answer, saying both yes and no. Richard explained that he and Connie both wanted another child, but medical issues had prevented them from conceiving again. As detectives investigated further, Richard shared surprising information. He revealed that he and Connie had made a plan for him to have a child with another woman. Richard claimed that artificial insemination was too costly, so they opted for a more personal arrangement. He mentioned that it was Connie's idea for the three of them, Richard, Connie, and the woman, to co-parent the child. To Richard, this seemed like a modern way to achieve their shared dream. However, investigators found his story puzzling. When detectives asked Richard whether Connie was aware of the woman's pregnancy, he avoided answering the question. Then, a crucial discovery was made: Connie and the woman had never actually met. This fact fundamentally weakened Richard's story. As more details emerged, the reality became clearer. Connie hadn't agreed to anything, and the woman's pregnancy was unplanned. It turned out Richard was hiding much more than just an affair. Later that day, investigators found this woman, and her account changed everything. She acknowledged knowing Richard was married but believed he was in the process of getting a divorce. Richard had told her that his marriage was over, that he and Connie were just waiting for the right moment to separate. On June 18, 2015, the woman found out she was pregnant. She chose to inform Richard. He responded with a false claim that he had already hired a divorce lawyer. By December, their relationship was still strong, and they were even planning a romantic getaway to Vermont just a week before Connie's death. During that trip, they discussed when to reveal their relationship, and Richard suggested they wait until after Christmas to do so. When the investigation focused on those close to Connie, a different story emerged. Her friends, the ones she usually confided in, had no idea about Richard's lover, the child, or the alleged agreement Richard claimed they had made. They insisted that if Connie had known about these things, she would have shared that information with them, as she always did. Richard privately shared his feelings with close friends, revealing that he loved his lover but was worried about losing Connie. However, the love triangle he was trying to keep hidden was on the verge of being exposed. Investigators had suspected from the outset that Richard might be linked to his wife's murder, although they kept their doubts to themselves. Publicly, it was believed that a masked intruder had broken into their home, killed Connie, and left Richard injured. Friends and neighbors sympathized with Richard, initially accepting his displayed grief without question, but investigators continued to pursue leads. One potential suspect was a contractor whom Connie and Richard had taken to small claims court over a dispute regarding home renovations. Connie had reportedly been fearful of this contractor, and her car had been vandalized twice in 2015, incidents she suspected were related to him. As a precaution, they had improved their home security system and acquired firearms. Throughout the investigation, the contractor's name frequently surfaced in interviews as a significant lead, but it soon became clear that he had a strong alibi for the day of the murder and did not match the description of the masked figure Richard provided. That lead quickly went cold. As investigators focused on Richard, others noticed his unusual behavior. His response to Connie's death was not typical for a grieving husband. He seemed off, his account of events kept changing, and his expressions of sorrow seemed insincere. The facade of a perfect family was already broken, and now the reality behind it was starting to emerge, revealing one contradiction and one deception at a time. In the days after Connie's tragic death, Richard's actions puzzled those around him. One of his first posts on a neighborhood forum was a seemingly casual question: "What's the best place for takeout?" This seemed shocking for someone whose wife had just been murdered. However, as investigators looked more closely into the couple's lives, deeper issues emerged. They were facing significant financial difficulties, spending much more than they earned, with much of the strain falling on Connie. She had shared with a friend her thoughts about leaving Richard and had even saved a private note on her phone titled "Reasons I Want to Divorce," where she documented Richard's dishonesty, emotional neglect, inadequate parenting, and selfish behavior. Investigators soon discovered a money trail. They found 2 life insurance policies, each valued at nearly $500,000. Although Richard's policy had expired because he didn't make payments, Connie's policy was still active. Remarkably, Richard filed a claim just 5 days after her death. A month later, he received another $75,000 from her employer. This shocking discovery revealed that the man who professed to be mourning her was already profiting from her death. Over the next year, detectives meticulously built Connie's case. They analyzed phone records, financial statements, emails, and security logs. The key breakthrough came from something often overlooked: Connie's Fitbit. The data was incriminating. The fitness tracker indicated she was alive and active long after Richard claimed she had been killed. On December 23rd, she woke up at 7:52 a.m. Her activity paused while she drove to the gym, which was confirmed by surveillance footage. She returned home around 9:20 a.m., and from 9:37 to 9:43, she was inactive, likely resting. After that, her tracker recorded movement, even social media activity from her phone. At 10:05 a.m., her Fitbit showed its last recorded movement, while Richard had stated she died around 9:05. This data clearly proved she was still alive an hour later, and it was the kind of evidence that no alibi could dismiss. On April 14, 2017, police arrested Richard DeBate, charging him with the murder of Connie, tampering with evidence, and making false statements. Although Richard pleaded not guilty, his arrest shocked the community in Ellington. To many, he appeared to be a grieving husband rather than a murderer. Prosecutors put together a 50-page affidavit detailing the case against him, which included his extramarital affair, insurance money, inconsistencies in his story, and the Fitbit data that contradicted his account of events. However, the justice process was slow. The case experienced 2 delays, and it wasn't until April 5, 2022, almost 6.5 years later, that the trial finally commenced. When it did, the courtroom was filled with people, including 600 exhibits and 130 witnesses. Connie's story had gained national attention and was often referred to as the Fitbit murder. The defense aimed to create uncertainty concerning the case. They highlighted the presence of unidentified DNA found in multiple areas of the house, suggesting that another person may have been there. They also pointed out that the amount of gunshot residue on Richard was minimal, arguing that it was too low for someone who had just fired a gun. However, the prosecution firmly countered these claims. They asserted that the DNA evidence did not indicate another suspect but served to divert attention from the main issue. Regarding the gunshot residue, they explained that the test was conducted several hours later, allowing Richard the opportunity to wash his hands, clean up, and potentially tamper with the scene. The prosecution maintained that Richard had a clear motive. He was under pressure, his lover was pregnant, Connie wanted to leave, and Richard's seemingly perfect life was about to unravel. The pressure is mounting. The baby is coming, and the defendant's worst fears are about to be realized. After a 5-week trial, the jury took only 3 hours to reach their verdict. On May 10, 2022, Richard DeBate, 46, was found guilty on all charges. During the sentencing, the judge was straightforward. She described the crime as premeditated, heinous, and incomprehensible, sentencing him to 65 years, just 1 year short of the maximum possible sentence. He is currently housed at McDougall Walker Prison in Suffield, Connecticut. For Connie's family, the long ordeal is finally over. The judge took a moment to remember Connie, not just as a victim, but as a vibrant woman, a loving mother, and a devoted friend. With justice now served, Connie's story will always be remembered. Richard maintains his innocence to this day, and his lawyers continue to appeal his conviction. As recently as October 2024, local NBC Connecticut reported that Richard's lawyers argued their client did not receive a fair trial, citing questions posed by the state prosecutor, including inquiries that asked Richard to respond to the testimonies of other witnesses. However, Richard remains behind bars, convicted of murdering his wife to cover up an affair. He is not scheduled for release until 2087, although his lawyers continue to pursue appeals to try to shorten his sentence. No decision has been made regarding Richard's appeal from October 2024, which could potentially review his conviction and sentence. The Connecticut Supreme Court upheld the conviction on March 11, 2025. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we will explore a new case, the case of Tony Alexander King. Rocio Juaninkov Hornos was born in 1979 in Spain and was the youngest of 3 siblings. Their parents divorced when Rocio was very young, and the children remained with their mother. Her mother, Alicia Hornos, raised her and her 2 older siblings, Rosa and Guillermo, in the town of Millas. Rocio was described as an angelic child. She had a positive outlook on life and was adept at finding solutions to challenges. She cared deeply for her mother and siblings. At that time, Rocio was also in a relationship with a boy who, according to many, loved her very much. However, everything changed on October 9, 1999. That day, Rocio spent the day and evening at her boyfriend's house, where his mother was also present. They decided to go to a fair in Fuengirola, a nearby village. Later that evening, around 9:30 p.m., Rocio chose to leave her boyfriend's house, saying she wanted to go home to shower and change before going to the fair. It was only a 500-meter walk back to her house, but something happened during her walk, and she never returned home. Rocio's mother thought her daughter had gone to the fair with her boyfriend or friends, so she didn't raise the alarm when Rocio didn't come home. Rosa and Guillermo were also waiting for Rocio at home, but hadn't heard from her either. When Rocio still hadn't returned by the next morning, Alicia became anxious. Alicia called Rocio's boyfriend. He said he hadn't seen Rocio and confirmed that they had planned to go to the fair, but that at the last moment, he fell asleep and didn't go anywhere. He mentioned that he had tried to call Rocio, but acquaintances said they hadn't seen her at the fair. He thought she had come home late and was very tired. Alicia was very worried because there had been no news about her daughter. Her anxiety grew until her partner Juan Chirillo suggested they take a walk to relieve some stress. He planned to show her some nearby ruins, hoping it would help her relax. Many people had reassured them that their daughter would return soon. As they walked, everything seemed normal, until Alicia spotted a pair of sneakers on the ground. She believed they belonged to her daughter. Continuing through the vacant lot, she became increasingly alarmed when she saw bloodstains and a piece of fabric. Feeling agitated, Alicia was convinced that something terrible had happened, so Juan called the police for assistance. The police arrived and secured the area to search for evidence. In addition to the sneakers, bloodstains, and fabric, they discovered tire tracks that had crossed over a puddle of blood, as well as a cigarette butt from a brand not commonly found in Spain. After analyzing the evidence, they found that the DNA from the cigarette butt did not match any records in the database, but they preserved the sample for future testing. The tire tracks indicated that the car involved was quite old and had not been made in Spain for 6 years. It was also determined to be a small vehicle. Since Rocio had practically vanished in the middle of the night, it was very difficult to find witnesses, especially since the area was not crowded. However, the first witness came forward after the evidence was collected. He was a taxi driver who reported that on the night of Rocio's disappearance, around 10 p.m., he was driving home from work and passed by the street where the evidence was found. He heard screams and became very scared, so he closed the windows of his car. The taxi driver also noticed a man inside an SUV and was able to provide a description of the man, which was used to create a composite sketch. The photo sketch was disseminated across all media outlets, so that people could provide information about this man if they knew anything. At the same time, the police were searching for this person in the nearby grove. In cases like this, the last person to see the victim, especially if they were a romantic partner, often becomes the main suspect. In this instance, that person was Jose Antonio Rios. The police examined his phone and interrogated him 6 times. His account raised suspicions for several reasons, one being that he couldn't recall what the victim was wearing that day. The victim's family provided information that contradicted Jose's statements. They stated that she was wearing a white t-shirt with a Nike logo and purple pants, but Jose insisted he had never seen her in that outfit. He claimed he was unfamiliar with the white t-shirt. Additionally, Jose's mother confirmed that the victim had been wearing a jacket when she left their house at 9:30 p.m. and she had helped fasten it on her. Jose's family was taken aback to find that the jacket was still at their home, suggesting that Rocio must have returned to Jose's house in different clothing that day. Jose insisted on his original account. When Rocio went her home, he fell asleep and he didn't know anything else. The location where the evidence was discovered was very close to Jose's house. If the girl had been screaming, as the taxi driver stated, Jose should have heard her since he lived on the lower floor. He claimed he didn't hear anything, and neither did his family. There was no way to verify his alibi as he claimed to have been sleeping at home. Only his parents and a few relatives could confirm that. It was also odd that he didn't offer to take his girlfriend home at such a late hour, even though they could have gone to the fair together. No suspicious calls were found on his phone, leading the investigators to halt further questioning. He appeared in various media outlets to talk about Rocio, expressing hope for her return and participating in the search efforts. The search for Rocio included all nearby areas, with the central zone being where the evidence was found. Alicia suspected that the attack might have occurred there, and there were concerns that Rocio could be seriously injured or even dead. They searched within a 75-kilometer radius of the location where the evidence was discovered. Alicia appeared on television, pleading for assistance in finding her daughter. In her desperation, Alicia consulted several mediums, all of whom claimed that her daughter was still alive. The search continued tirelessly until November 2, 1999. Unfortunately, that day ended in tragedy when police and family members discovered Rocio. She was found deceased near Los Altos del Rodeo Sports Club. The property included a lot with a tennis court, where Rocio's body was located. She was found under a tree by the owners of the court. Rocio was naked and had sustained stab wounds, burns, and significant damage to her body from lying beneath the tree for an extended period. The level of decomposition was so advanced that her identity could not be determined through physical features, and she was ultimately recognized by the jewelry she had been wearing that day. The autopsy determined that Rocio died on the same day she went missing. She had 9 stab wounds in various areas of her body, with marks from the weapon on her bones. Her throat had also been cut. 2 tied garbage bags were found near her body, suggesting that she had been transported to the location by car. These bags likely served to prevent blood from staining the trunk. The investigators believed that the perpetrator did not leave her there on the day of her disappearance, but rather several days later. Investigators discovered a badge next to the body. However, the badge had no name on it and therefore provided no useful information. The autopsy revealed that all 9 stab wounds were made with the same weapon, likely a pocket knife. 8 of these wounds were clustered on her back, indicating that she might have been unconscious or already dead when they were inflicted. The remaining wound on her front, like the 8 on her back, affected vital organs and contributed to her death. Additionally, pink fabric fibers were found at the scene. Besides, another bag was discovered at the crime scene containing her clothing. This bag held a hair that did not belong to Rocio, as it was dark, while she had blonde hair. Although this bag, along with the badge and fabric fibers found on the body, could have aided investigators, they were not useful at that time. The hair was rootless, and the technology then available could not analyze DNA without a root. The fabric fibers, identified as clothing fibers, could not be analyzed either. They needed to be compared with the suspect's clothing, and the samples would have to match exactly for the evidence to be significant. The only helpful item for the police was the clothing found in the bag, including a well-known white t-shirt. This t-shirt had traces that supported the theory that Rocio died from stab wounds and confirmed the number of wounds inflicted. A few weeks prior, 4 police officers noticed a car with multiple passengers while patrolling the area where Rocio later went missing. When they checking the license plate, they found that the car belonged to Dolores Vasquez. Dolores and Alicia have been in a romantic lesbian relationship for 10 years. Initially, their relationship was happy, and they bought a house where they lived with Alicia's children. However, issues arose as the children grew older. Dolores took on the role of disciplinarian and was much stricter than Alicia preferred. Dolores often criticized and punished the children severely, leading to frequent arguments between the couple. Ultimately, they decided to separate because their relationship had become unhappy. Even after the separation and Alicia moving out of their shared home, Dolores remained a significant figure in her life. Alicia, Rocio's mother, lacked higher education and struggled to find a well-paying job, which led to financial challenges for the family. Meanwhile, Dolores held a high-status job and provided substantial financial support to them. She often expressed her love for Alicia's children as if they were her own, particularly for Rocio, whom she practically raised. Dolores was instrumental in the efforts to find Rocio and also contributed financially to the investigation. As the investigation progressed, the police initially had several suspects, but that number gradually decreased. Almost a year after Rocio's death, in September 2000, the first arrest occurred. Dolores was taken into custody as the sole suspect. Dolores's arrest was initially controversial, as the police had no clear evidence linking her to the crime. Some initial clues led them to suspect that the real culprit might be a man, as suggested by a sketch provided by the only witness, a taxi driver. However, the police focused on Dolores, believing that she was motivated by a recent breakup with Alicia Hornos, Rocio's mother. They suspected that Dolores may have acted out of resentment. There were even rumors that Rocio played a role in the breakup, as her relationship with Dolores was said to be strained. These assumptions became the justification for Dolores's arrest. After the detention, one of Spain's most publicized and controversial trials began. Dolores was interrogated for several hours, but consistently maintained her innocence. Earlier, evidence suggesting her involvement had emerged. Pink fabric fibers found on Rocio's body were compared to Dolores's athletic clothing. Laboratory analysis indicated a near-perfect match, confirming that the fibers came from Dolores's clothing. This initial analysis was conducted by a toxicological laboratory, and the police announced the findings at a press conference, leading to a shift in public opinion against Dolores. However, at her attorney's request, a second analysis was conducted at a forensic laboratory. This time, the result was negative. Dolores's defense argued that the initial laboratory might have made an error. The case received widespread media coverage, and everyone had something to say about the actual findings of the police or Dolores's family life. Discussions arose suggesting that Dolores harbored deep-seated resentment towards Rocio. The trial commenced in 2001, and multiple testimonies revealed a very strained relationship between Dolores and Rocio. Alicia testified that Dolores often punished Rocio harshly, restricted her from leaving the house for many years, and frequently yelled at her. As a result, Rocio struggled academically, leading to further reprimands from Dolores, intensifying their conflicts. Alicia recalled a specific moment when Rocio expressed her fears, saying, "Mom, one day she is going to kill me, and you will do nothing." Rosa also shared her experiences of humiliation at the hands of Dolores. Initially, this behavior stemmed from Dolores's education. Unlike Alicia, who could read and write but had no formal qualifications, Dolores's education set her apart. Dolores often introduced Alicia as her sister to friends and acquaintances, rarely acknowledging her as a partner to anyone outside their close circle. This led Alicia to feel that Dolores no longer loved her or her family. A few months prior to the incident, Dolores had threatened Alicia because she refused to rekindle their relationship. Alicia was already with someone else. Alicia told Dolores that their romantic involvement was over, but Alicia was open to being friends and would offer help if needed. In response, she ominously warned Alicia, "You will cry bloody tears. You will be in pain." However, there was no evidence to show that Dolores was physically at the crime scene or had approached Rocio's body. The available evidence may suggest the guilt of someone else, rather than that of Dolores. Despite this, she was labeled guilty based on the evidence presented in court. The police suspected that Rocio knew her attacker. They believed this individual had given her a cloth to use on her wound after inflicting the first injury to the front of her body. However, when Rocio attempted to escape, the attacker, in a fit of rage, inflicted additional wounds to her back. The numerous wounds indicated a level of hatred and cruelty. One piece of evidence was a badge. Dolores participated in the searches, so she could have had access to these badges. Additionally, the testimonies of Dolores's employees came into play, indicating that Dolores was anxious and irritable on the days surrounding Rocio's disappearance. One employee reported that on the day Rocio's body was found, Dolores took a picture of her and began stabbing it with a knife, ultimately destroying the photo. Dolores claimed this was because the employee's Spanish was poor and she wanted to explain what had happened to Rocio. Meanwhile, the police have not released information about how Rocio was killed. An employee reported that on the day of the incident, Dolores shouted about a problem. Another piece of evidence against Dolores is that she usually took daily walks with a friend from Ukraine between 9 and 10 o'clock in the evening. However, on the day Rocio disappeared, Dolores did not meet with her friend and canceled their plans. Additionally, it was discovered that Dolores's phone was tapped, revealing a conversation in which she stated, "They have nothing." The police questioned her friends and family, prompting many to contact Dolores to check on her and ask what to say to the authorities. It became clear to the police that Dolores was confident she would not be caught, believing they had no evidence against her. However, Dolores's defense countered each point made by the prosecution. They presented a record of Dolores's phone calls from that day, both of which were lengthy. If she made her first call at 22:34 and the taxi driver heard Rocio scream around 10 p.m., it would have been impossible for Dolores to arrive, commit the murder, dispose of the body, and then make those calls in such a short time frame. Furthermore, when Dolores called her friends and family, none reported that she seemed nervous or acted unusually. Everything appeared normal. As a result, some evidence was dismissed. The defense also aimed to disprove the significance of a tire track found at the scene. The track belonged to an old car, while Dolores drove a newer Toyota with different tires. The prosecution suggested that Dolores could have rented a car, but this was deemed unlikely. Where could she have rented a car at 10 or 11 p.m.? Rental services would have logged such an unusual request, yet the prosecution had no proof that Dolores rented a vehicle. There was also a theory that she borrowed a car from a neighbor who left their keys in the car, but this idea was considered too far-fetched to be taken seriously. The DNA found on the cigarette butt belonged to a man. The taxi driver testified that he saw a man near the garbage bags containing Rocio's body. Fingerprints on the bags did not match those of Dolores, meaning there was no evidence to prove she was at the crime scene. The only accusation against her was a possible desire for revenge. Additionally, Dolores was known to be psychologically unstable, unfriendly, and often in a bad mood. This was a jury trial. The verdict was delivered not by the judge, but by the jury. The jury was composed of 9 members who deliberated for several hours. The decision was not unanimous, reflecting 7 votes in favor and 2 against. A few months into the trial, Dolores was found guilty of intentionally murdering Rocio Waninkoff and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Here's what the police believe happened on October 9, 1999. Around 9:30 p.m., Rocio left her boyfriend's house to go home, intending to take a shower and change. While walking home, she encountered Dolores. They began to argue and the situation escalated. Dolores pulled out a knife and stabbed Rocio in the front. After injuring Rocio, Dolores nervously handed her a handkerchief to stop the bleeding. Fearing that Rocio would report her to the police, Dolores chased after her when she tried to flee. Rocio, weakened by her injuries, fell, and Dolores then stabbed her 8 more times. After confirming that Rocio was dead, Dolores placed her body in her car. To keep the interior clean, she wrapped the body in 2 plastic bags. For several days, she concealed the body while participating in the search for Rocio and giving interviews. Eventually, she moved the body to the location where it was later discovered. Dolores initially served her prison sentence, but in 2002, an appeal was filed on her behalf. The appeal was successful, leading to a new trial being scheduled. While Dolores awaited her second trial, both the defense and prosecution prepared to present new evidence. However, an unexpected event caused the trial to be postponed. In August 2003, a 17-year-old girl named Sonia Carabantes went missing from her village after the holidays. Sonia and her family had moved to Malaga after living in Switzerland for a while. As days passed without any news about Sonia, the police worked diligently to locate her. This situation reminded many people of the case of Rocio, as both girls were of similar ages and had similar builds. Tragically, Sonia's fate mirrored that of Rocio. On August 19, 2003, Sonia's body was discovered. She had been strangled and had multiple stab wounds. 2 days after the body was found, on August 21, an autopsy was conducted. During the examination, genetic material was discovered under the victim's nails. This material was identified as skin, indicating that the girl had struggled with her attacker. This evidence could help the police identify the murderer. A DNA sample was taken, analyzed, and entered into the database. The DNA under Sonia's nails matched 100% with DNA found on cigarette butts, linked to Dolores Vasquez from a few years prior. This was puzzling because the person suspected of killing Sonia was already in prison. This means that it is clear that someone else killed both girls. This information was beneficial for Dolores's defense, essentially clearing her of all charges. As a result, there was an increasing belief that Dolores was innocent. One woman stated that her ex-husband, Tony Alexander King, had been acting suspiciously around the time of Rocio's disappearance. She mentioned that he had scratches on his hands were swollen, and he brought home bloody clothes, claiming he had been injured in an accident. On the day Sonia disappeared, Tony visited her in a state of agitation, sweating, and with scratches on his body. When she asked him what had happened, he told her he had gotten into a fight outside a bar, but she found his explanation unconvincing. Tony was a British man living in Spain, near where the crimes took place. At the time, he was going through a divorce and had a child. The type of cigarettes found at the crime scene was Tony's favorite brand, which is rare in Spain. Tony was arrested on September 19, 2003. During the investigation, his DNA was collected, and the results confirmed a match with a cigarette butt and a sample found under Sonia's nails. After his arrest, details about his troubled past surfaced. Tony Alexander King, originally named Anthony Bromwich, was born in 1967. In 1986, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison for attacking several women. Additionally, he had been previously arrested for armed robbery. He served only half of his sentence before being released early for good behavior. Following his release, he changed his name and moved to Spain to start anew. In Spain, he met a woman named Cecilia Matilde Pantoja, and they had a daughter together, also named Sabrina. The Rocio family suspected that even if Dolores didn't commit the crime herself, she was somehow involved. They attended the court hearings for Tony. In 2005, Tony Alexander King was sentenced to 36 years in prison for the death of Sonia Carabantes, and an additional 7 years for an unrelated abuse assault he committed. The trial of Tony Alexander King in connection with the murder of Rocio Waninkoff, which took place in 2006. Initially, Tony claimed he had burned Rocio's body, which contradicted the official account. Although Rocio's body showed signs of burns and fire damage, it was not completely incinerated as Tony had stated. However, during the trial, Tony changed his story completely. He accused 2 individuals, Robert and Dolores, of being involved in the crime. He mentioned that he did not know Dolores well, but that they had a mutual friend, Robert. Tony explained that on October 9, 1999, he went to Robert's house to drink and do banned substance. After a while, he started feeling sick, and then Dolores arrived with another man. He alleged that Robert hypnotized him, and the next thing he remembered was sitting in a car with Robert and Dolores. Tony claimed that in the shadows of the car, Dolores attacked Rocio from behind. He said they placed Rocio in the trunk without realizing Rocio was still alive. Later, Robert got out of the car to check on Rocio. They then wrapped the body in bags to prevent any stains in the car. Tony insisted that he had minimal involvement and portrayed himself as merely a witness to a terrible crime. He is claiming that he left a cigarette butt at the scene. In the second trial, the defense pointed out that the car found at the crime scene was not Tony's car. There was an emerging belief that Tony was not acting alone. When asked why he had not mentioned this during his police arrest, he stated that Dolores had threatened to kill his daughter if he spoke up. On December 14, 2006, the trial ended, and the jury took 13 hours to deliberate. Tony King was convicted of the intentional murder of Rocio, while all charges against Robert were dismissed. Tony was sentenced to 19 years in prison and ordered to pay two compensations: 200,000 euros to Rocio's mother and 42,000 euros to her brother and sister. Dolores was released due to the lack of evidence to convict her for her involvement in Rocio's murder. This was a new version of the crime. One night, Tony approached a girl walking home and began to assault and intimidate her. He grabbed her by the neck and pushed her to the location where the evidence was later found. The girl fought back, and he stabbed her in the chest. During the struggle, Rocio managed to unmask him and attempted to flee, but he realized he had gone too far. None of his previous victims had escaped or sustained such severe injuries. After Rocio collapsed, he repeatedly stabbed her in the back until she was no longer breathing. He left her body there for several hours before returning in a car. It is believed that he had the accomplice who helped him load the body into the vehicle. For several days he kept the body with him before disposing of it where it was ultimately found. After the trial, Dolores moved to London and was granted compensation for the months she spent in prison. Many believe that the case cannot be considered closed, as there are still people who assisted Tony. Some think that those individuals could have included Dolores. The families of Rocio and Sonia suffered the loss of daughters who can never return. This case is quite complex, with many developments, particularly in Rocio's case. It remains uncertain whether a single DNA sample found on a cigarette butt was sufficient to place all the blame on Tony. Meanwhile, the Rocio family believes that Dolores played a role in the crime, even if she did not directly kill Rocio. The first test suggested that fibers from Dolores's clothing were found, but a subsequent test contradicted that finding. There is no concrete evidence against her. Unfortunately, without solid evidence, we can only theorize. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Angela Allen. In early 2012, Angela Allen was a 16-year-old high school student living in Van Buren, Arkansas. She was known for her positive and kind nature and was very religious, attending church regularly. Angela had a passion for children and dreamed of pursuing a nursing career in the future, with the goal of working in a hospital. She also loved animals and was always optimistic about life. Angela grew up in a dysfunctional family. Her father was abusive to her mother, but fortunately, he did not harm the children. However, he abandoned his family and had no contact with Cecilia or his children. After he left, Cecilia became involved with another man, who turned out to be cruel. She endured years of abuse from him. Later, Cecilia became addicted to illegal drugs and alcohol, which eventually resulted in her losing custody of her children. Cecilia did not want her children to be placed in foster homes or boarding schools. Cecilia eventually agreed to let her mother adopt Angela and her brother. Although Cecilia visited them frequently, they were unable to develop a close relationship. Cecilia's mother was determined to provide her grandchildren with everything they needed. Although she was retired, she took on a part-time job to earn extra money. She raised the children in a loving environment, hoping they would receive a good education and become independent. Despite their efforts, finances were tight, and they had to save a lot. The children understood their situation, did not ask for much, and appreciated their grandmother's care. During her school years, Angela dreamed of having a computer and a mobile phone. She wanted to connect with friends on social networks and play games like other children her age. Angela often felt jealous of her friends who had these devices. However, she understood that her grandmother could not afford them, so she never pressured her to buy expensive things. Angela was usually modest, influenced by her strong religious beliefs. Nevertheless, every time she went to church, she prayed for a smartphone. Finally, her prayers were answered. On her 16th birthday, her grandmother saved enough money to buy her a modern mobile phone. Angela was so excited that she quickly created an account on social networks. Almost every day, she made new friends. However, this naive girl did not realize the potential dangers of sharing her phone number with strangers. Angela often received calls from unknown numbers, even late at night. This situation worried her brother, who was more aware of the potential dangers. He realized that Angela's naivety could put her in danger. One time, her brother answered a call from a stranger. The caller turned out to be a 30-year-old man to whom Angela had given her cell phone number via social media. Angela's brother threatened to report the man to the police if he did not stop contacting Angela. He reminded the caller that Angela was only 16, prompting the man to hang up. A stranger wanted to meet Angela, but it was clear that he had bad intentions. The situation worsened when Angela misrepresented her age on social media. In the photos, she looked older, which meant that the men did not realize they were talking to a minor. This led to a serious argument between Angela and her brother. Her brother then told their grandmother about the situation, and she spoke to Angela, explaining the potential dangers and the intentions of these strange men online. Angela began to understand the risks involved in her behavior and realized that it was not safe. She promised her grandmother that she would avoid such situations in the future. On the evening of February 10, 2012, Angela told her grandmother that she was going for a walk, which was her normal routine, as she usually liked to walk before going to bed. While her grandmother did the housework, Angela went for a walk. After a while, her grandmother fell asleep. When she woke up, she was shocked to see that Angela had not returned from her walk. She began to panic and went to the police to report Angela missing. She explained to the police that Angela had left the night before and had not returned home all night. The grandmother sensed that something was wrong because Angela had never been out this late before, and it was unusual for her to run away. They had not argued, and all of Angela's belongings were still at home. The police quickly arrived at Angela's grandmother's house, where they found her distressed and pleading for help in finding her granddaughter. She provided a photo and description of Angela, as well as details of what she was wearing when she left. Several patrol cars searched the area but found no trace of her. By this time, many neighbors had learned of the situation and joined in the search. Some spoke to the police to offer their assistance. Unfortunately, no one had seen Angela that night, so they were unable to provide any information about the direction she had gone. Angela's grandmother described her usual walking route, and the police checked several times but found no signs of an attack or any clues as to Angela's whereabouts. Days passed without any progress on the case. During this time, everyone in the area knew that Angela was missing. The local community grew increasingly concerned because there had been no ransom demands. She had not contacted anyone, and her social media accounts showed no activity. As the crucial 48 hours passed without any updates, the hope of finding Angela alive diminished. However, her grandmother remained hopeful until the very end. The FBI was brought in to assist in the search for Angela. Agents first focused on her social media accounts. They checked her cell phone and, surprisingly, over the weekend after her disappearance, Angela sent several text messages to family members, including her mother, brother, grandmother, and a friend. In these messages, she claimed to have a new boyfriend and said that she had left with him in a black Chevrolet Camaro to a nearby town about 2 hours away. She asked them not to bother her. The messages sent from Angela's phone raised suspicions. Her grandmother believed that the messages were written in a way that did not match Angela's usual writing style. She suggested that the messages may have been sent by someone else who was trying to distract the search. After sending those messages, Angela, who was usually very communicative, stopped responding to friends and family, which was completely out of character for her. FBI agents discovered hundreds of contacts, including Angela's relatives and friends. After reviewing the information, they noticed a man who had recently contacted Angela, which led to suspicions of his involvement in her disappearance. Lloyd Jones was brought in for questioning and was found to have a history of violence against women. During the investigation, FBI agents discovered numerous communications between Lloyd and Angela, indicating that he had been trying to convince her to meet for some time. Lloyd was considered strange, especially in his interactions with girls. In 2001, he was convicted of abuse after breaking into the home of a woman he had been stalking. He attacked her, threatened her life, and abused her before leaving the scene. The victim reported the incident to the police, resulting in Lloyd being sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was paroled after serving 7 years for good behavior. In February 2012, Angela, who had been communicating online with Lloyd for a long time, suddenly disappeared. The police suspected Lloyd of being involved in her case. Lloyd claimed to live in the same city as Angela. He said he was only 1 year older than she was and was studying at a nearby school. Their online friendship developed into a romantic relationship. He tricked Angela, gaining her trust to obtain intimate photos of her, but he didn't stop there. The day before Angela went missing, she received an invitation from Lloyd to meet on the evening of February 9, 2012. When Angela left home for a walk, she was dressed up and had put on makeup. She didn't tell her grandmother that she was meeting someone, but when she returned, she acted strangely. She seemed worried and was crying, but she didn't explain why. The following evening, Angela went missing. During questioning, Lloyd confessed that he had met Angela online, where they developed a friendship and eventually agreed to meet in person. He stated that she had claimed to be 19, which made him feel comfortable meeting her. On the night they met, he picked her up in his car near her grandmother's house. However, he began to suspect that she might be younger than she had said. After a brief conversation, Angela revealed that she was actually 16. This worried Lloyd, who feared that he might get into trouble with the law, so he asked Angela to get out of the car. They only drove a short distance before he dropped her off, and he did not wait for her to return home. He claimed that he never saw her again and insisted that he had nothing to do with her disappearance. It was clear that Lloyd was not telling the truth. Analysis of the text messages exchanged between Angela and Lloyd showed that she quickly admitted her true age of 16, and he did not dispute this. This meant that he knew her real age. When confronted with this contradiction, Lloyd began to avoid the question, claiming that he could not remember that part of their conversation. He suggested that he might have missed the text message. During questioning, he continued to adjust his story and eventually recalled that Angela had called her friend before leaving the car. He claimed that a few minutes later, a black Chevrolet Camaro pulled up and she got into it. This was the car mentioned in the text messages from Angela's phone. FBI agents and police were skeptical of Lloyd's claim. To determine whether he had indeed sent the messages on Angela's behalf, they needed to analyze their communications in more detail. Some parts of the conversation were redacted, but an agent was able to reconstruct the conversations. Police discovered a history of Lloyd's online activity that began long before Angela went missing. He targeted young girls, trying to lure them into meetings. He had attracted several victims. Police interviewed some of these girls, and one confirmed that she had met Lloyd online. They had been communicating as friends for a while, and he seemed nice to her. In reality, he had taken advantage of her loneliness as she was going through a breakup at the time. Unfortunately, she agreed to meet him, which led her to a warehouse where she was attacked. After the attack, Lloyd threatened her for a long time, using photos to intimidate her into silence and prevent her from contacting the police. The police do not believe that Angela went to see Lloyd willingly. Lloyd tricked Angela using a method he had successfully employed before. Evidence also indicated that he used some photos and attempted to arrange a meeting with her. After the first meeting, Angela did not want to continue the relationship. It was unlikely that she would have willingly gotten into his car. He probably knew that she had a habit of going for walks before bed and waited for her near her house. Lloyd's story kept changing. He began to provide new details about Angela and her friend. He claimed to have heard that Angela and her friend were planning to go to the Arkansas River. This information was verified, and he was found to be lying. The police went to Lloyd's house and, with his permission, searched the premises. They discovered that he lived there with his girlfriend, who insisted that she did not believe he had kidnapped Angela. She claimed that on the day Angela went missing, Lloyd was busy working in a warehouse near their home and had no time to go out of town. The police were particularly interested in the warehouse because he had attacked another victim there. Lloyd was reportedly laying floors on the day Angela went missing, and his girlfriend was convinced of his innocence because he came home covered in dirt and construction materials. The police requested items for forensic analysis, and Lloyd's girlfriend provided what they needed. They found traces of dirt on his pants and jacket, but his shoes were suspiciously clean, leading the police to believe he had changed them. After mapping the location of the warehouse, the police noted that it was also where Angela's cell phone had last been active. The police decided to search the warehouse, hoping this would help them find Angela. When the police and Lloyd's girlfriend arrived at the shed, they immediately noticed a disturbed area of land behind the building. The land belonged to Lloyd, but they needed official permission to conduct a thorough search. Lloyd initially agreed, but he later prohibited digging in that particular location. The police brought specially trained dogs with them, and one dog signaled near the disturbed area next to the shed, which was unusual. However, the police could not take further action without a warrant. Several police officers interviewed neighbors who may have seen something on the day Angela went missing or afterward. However, no one reported anything unusual. Some neighbors said Lloyd had been on the land for a long time, which was not unusual since he usually worked in his shed. The police then had to leave. Given the situation, it was important to act quickly before Lloyd could destroy any evidence. The police managed to obtain a warrant in a very short time. The next morning, the officers quickly returned to the scene with the necessary documents and specially trained dogs. They suspected that the Angela was no longer alive. The police focused on a specific area that had interested them the day before and began digging through half a meter of loose soil. Forensic experts discovered a metal plate, and the search dogs became excited as they approached a steel plate. Underneath it, they found a blue plastic barrel that had been buried and sealed. It appeared that the barrel had been placed there recently, as the soil above it was still fresh and loose. The police then dug up the plastic bin. Inside, they found a body. The body was in poor condition and was immediately taken to the forensic lab, where the victim was identified as Angela Allen. The forensic expert concluded that she had been abused and that the cause of death was strangulation. Her grandmother needed psychological support to cope with the tragic news, even though the body did not require identification. On the day of Angela Allen's funeral, 16-year-old Angela was buried in the city center, attended by hundreds of people. There was now an urgent need to bring the killer to justice. The suspect, identified as Lloyd, had buried Angela on his property. DNA evidence linked Lloyd to the crime, confirming that he had strangled Angela, as indicated by marks on her neck. Although some time had passed since the murder, the cold February temperatures and the burial helped preserve much of the evidence, including the DNA. During a visit to his father in prison, Lloyd confessed to the crime. This confession was recorded and added to the case file. Lloyd's girlfriend later told the police that when he returned home that night, His clothes and shoes were covered in dirt and blood. She didn't think much of it at the time, but he must have discarded them afterward. With the overwhelming evidence against him, Lloyd's attorney didn't even attempt to argue for his innocence. Instead, the defense focused on the idea of an unintentional crime. During the trial, Lloyd changed his testimony. He admitted that he went with Angela because she wanted to watch the sunset. When Angela revealed that she was only 16 years old, he became upset. In a fit of rage, he pushed her into the river. After a while, he realized that she was not coming up for air. When he pulled her out, he discovered that she had drowned. However, this was all a lie. The medical examiner confirmed that Angela had not drowned. There were clear signs of strangulation on her body, and there was no water in her lungs. It is unclear why he chose to fabricate such a false story. Nevertheless, this obvious deception only strengthened the jury's belief in Lloyd's guilt. The prosecutor presented their version of events during the trial. Angela and Lloyd's first meeting took place on February 9. Angela, a teenage girl, had dressed up for a date with someone her own age, but became frightened when she encountered an adult man instead. She refused to get in his car and go home with him, which upset her. Lloyd was determined not to give up. He tried to convince her to meet again. When his attempts failed, he resorted to threatening her by saying that he would share her private photos with all the students at the school. Terrified, Angela agreed to meet him, but this time, she would not survive. He attacked and abused her, then strangled her. The jury quickly returned a verdict. Lloyd Jones was sentenced to 60 years in prison for Angela Allen's death, without the possibility of parole. He was also sentenced to an additional 30 years, which included 10 years for desecration of a corpse and 20 years in prison for using inappropriate photos of minors. However, things changed. After serving just 4 years of his sentence, Lloyd escaped. At the time, Lloyd was incarcerated at a correctional facility in Brick, Arkansas. He regularly worked at a construction site, where he gained the respect and trust of others. Eventually, Lloyd escaped. Angela's family was notified in time, as they were potential targets. Every available resource was mobilized to capture him. Residents were informed through the news on radio and television, and updates were spread via text messages and social media. Police searched the area for 3 days and eventually found Lloyd, who was hiding in a wooded area near the prison. He was arrested again and returned to prison. He is currently serving time in a maximum security prison in Arkansas. Angela's family was devastated by her loss, and the unexpected escape of the criminal caused widespread concern. The grandmother felt guilty for not paying enough attention to her granddaughter, not checking her social media messages, and trusting her own judgment. She realized that she had allowed this criminal into their lives. Driven by a desire for justice, Angela's grandmother led the effort to create a petition called Angela's Law. The law requires closer monitoring of abusers. It has successfully passed through all necessary channels and is now in effect. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Suzanne Sills. On Sunday, November 13, 2016, Dr. Scott Sills, a renowned fertility specialist in California, called 911 to report that his wife, Suzanne, had fallen down the stairs. When he found her, she showed no signs of life. Scott activated the speakerphone for the call. The dispatcher guided him on how to provide first aid, and he followed the instructions while their children were nearby. He claimed that Suzanne showed signs of life after the first aid was administered. When the paramedics arrived, Scott stated that she was alive. However, the paramedics suspected that he was mistaken because she was already deceased. The police were then notified, and several officers arrived at the house. They noticed bruises on Suzanne's neck that appeared to be from strangulation, indicating that her injuries could not have been caused by a simple fall down the stairs. Scott told the police that Susan wanted to walk her dog, as she did every morning. He suggested that after she fell down the stairs, the dogs might have pulled her scarf, leading to her suffocation and leaving marks on her body. However, the police suspected that the dogs could not have caused Suzanne's death in this way, so they concluded that she had been murdered. They especially believed that Scott could be the real killer. To investigate further, they first looked at Scott's testimony. Was it possible that Suzanne fell down the stairs and suffered fatal injuries? This seemed plausible since the stairs were over 4 meters high and very steep. However, Suzanne was a 45-year-old woman in excellent physical condition and had always been careful, so a fall seemed unlikely. During their examination, the police discovered injuries all over Suzanne's body. Her face was covered in bruises, and both her arms and legs had wounds that could not have resulted from a fall. Additionally, items found near her body raised further questions, as they did not align with Scott's account. Meanwhile, he appeared surprisingly calm, even with his wife's body lying dead in the house. Despite the suspicions surrounding him, Scott cooperated fully with the police, allowing them to search his house and providing all necessary information and DNA samples. Meanwhile, one of the officers began questioning Scott and Suzanne's children. They had 2 children, 12-year-old Eric and his twin sister, Mary Catherine. Both children shared that their mother, Suzanne, had been unwell the day before, suffering from migraines, which she experienced periodically. The pain was quite debilitating for her. During these episodes, she would retreat to a dark room, lie down, and remain quiet. Next to her body was a saucepan, an item she often kept close during these times in case she felt nauseous. Suzanne would place it near her bed, and when she woke up in the morning and decided to take the dogs for a walk, she would bring it with her to the kitchen. An empty pill bottle found nearby contained painkillers that Suzanne used to manage her migraines. Her husband, Scott, described their relationship as warm, and both children confirmed that their parents shared a deeply understanding and loving bond. They rarely fought and were generally seen as very positive individuals. With information from family members, the investigators were able to piece together what happened before the tragedy. On Saturday evening, November 12, 2016, Suzanne went to sleep in Mary's room, which was the quietest and darkest place, to manage her pain. Around midnight, Scott checked on Suzanne to see how she was doing. Since Suzanne was already asleep, Mary chose to sleep in her parents' room instead. Detectives discovered a heartfelt note Mary left for her mother on the door, expressing her love and wishing her a speedy recovery. Eric said that at around 4 a.m., he woke up after hearing an argument between his parents, Suzanne and Scott. He was resting in the next room, listening to the loud and seemingly annoyed voices. He also did not hear any other unusual noises. After about 5 minutes, Scott decided to sleep in the main bedroom where Mary was sleeping. When Scott entered, Mary woke up and asked what was happening. He explained that he and Suzanne had argued over a work-related email, assuring her that there was no need to worry. Scott later told the police that when he checked on Suzanne at 4 a.m., she was working on her laptop. He tried to convince her to go to bed because she was feeling unwell due to a migraine, but she refused and continued working, which led to tension between the two. Eventually, the family went back to sleep. They woke up at 6:30 a.m. Scott suggested to Mary that they should go swimming. However, when she came out of the bedroom, she found her mother unresponsive at the bottom of the stairs. Her mother was lying on the floor with a long scarf around her neck, and there was a saucepan nearby. Mary screamed and called for her father, Scott. Scott noted that Susan often used this scarf to wrap around her head during migraines. This scarf belonged to Mary. However, there were questions about whether the dogs accidentally knocked her down and caused her to strangle herself. Could she have fallen in such a way that a scarf wrapped around her neck, leading to her death? These scenarios seemed unlikely, and suspicious details began to emerge. For example, If she was carrying an empty saucepan with her when she fell down the stairs, why did no one hear the noise and wake up in the early morning hours? The saucepan would have made noise hitting the tiled floor and stairs, so it couldn't have fallen silently. Additionally, it was odd that she had a scarf on a warm day. The police began to suspect her husband Scott, especially since a cut was found on his forehead. Scott also had a large bruise on his arm. He suggested that he got these injuries while repairing his car in the garage the day before. According to his statement, his son, Eric, assisted him with the repairs. However, there was a contradiction. Eric claimed that his father was not injured that day. They had left the garage together and entered the house, and during that time, Eric did not notice any injuries on his father. Eric also informed investigators that he saw his mother, Suzanne, putting the dogs in a cage a few hours before her death. Normally, after this, the dogs would go to sleep. Eric was puzzled as to why his mother would take them for a walk so early in the morning, especially when she seemed to be in a weakened state. While investigating Mary's bedroom, where Susan had spent the night, authorities discovered suspicious bloodstains on the curtains, wall, and bedside table. Mary asserted that when her mother entered the room, it was entirely clean and free of blood. Scott claimed that the bloodstains were old, from cuts he had made while replacing mosquito screens on his windows last spring. However, the stains appeared fresh. Despite the presence of the bloodstains, this evidence was insufficient to charge or arrest Scott. Then, Suzanne's body was sent for forensic examination, and officers left the house after 4 days. Although the autopsy was performed, the forensic expert could not provide clear answers. The examination revealed multiple injuries on the body, which could have been caused by either a fall down the stairs or physical assault. Strangulation was also a possibility. The most severe injury was a fracture at the base of the neck. Additionally, broken blood vessels in the eyes were found, a typical sign of strangulation. However, experts could not determine for certain whether the injuries were accidental or indicative of criminal activity. A more thorough analysis of all evidence was needed, which could take months, and no one wanted to rush, given the complexity and contentious nature of the case. The forensic experts concentrated on examining additional evidence gathered from the house, particularly the blood, which appeared suspicious. They also sent traces of blood and other items, including a phone and a laptop, for analysis. The Suzanne family had limited interaction with their neighbors, as they worked long hours and rarely engaged with others. Consequently, no one could provide useful information about what was happening inside their home. Additionally, no one reported hearing anything unusual during the night or in the morning. Investigators used communication tools to gather more information. This helped them identify people who had close relationships with Suzanne and Scott, thereby finding witnesses who could shed light on the motive for the incident. They spoke with students whom Scott taught, who described him as cheerful and kind. He always attended class dressed in an elegant three-piece suit. Some students who had a lot of interaction with him said he was the sweetest person. One girl recounted how he helped her financially multiple times when she couldn't afford lunch or a taxi home due to her family's financial struggles. Scott showed her great compassion. From a young age, it seemed that Scott had great potential. After finishing high school, he was accepted into law school and later pursued medical studies. His intelligence, determination, and hard work enabled him to become a successful specialist in reproductive issues. His work led him to meet Suzanne. She came to his clinic because she was struggling to conceive with her first husband. At that time, Suzanne had just graduated with a master's degree in business administration. She shared her fertility issues with Scott, who then took charge of her treatment. Over time, their professional relationship developed into a romantic one. Eventually, Suzanne decided to file for divorce. Suzanne was witty, cheerful, and very attractive, making her a loyal friend and a wonderful life partner. At a reunion of their business school, Scott attended with Suzanne, and they appeared to be a happy couple. So, When they announced their engagement, no one was surprised. Scott successfully addressed Suzanne's fertility issues through IVF, and she became pregnant, later giving birth to twins. Suzanne admired her husband greatly. She considered him a genius and an expert who could help many women. Thanks to Suzanne's efforts and her husband Scott's expertise, they opened a clinic together in April 2015. Suzanne played a crucial role in building and managing the business, while her husband focused on the medical procedures. Through this venture, they became very wealthy and purchased an expensive house in a prestigious part of the city. Scott developed an interest in luxury cars, and the family indulged in a lavish lifestyle. By this time, Scott had gained fame as a specialist. He was recognized due to his frequent television appearances. He authored several books and regularly contributed to professional publications, earning a reputation as one of the top experts in his field. It seemed that he and his wife Suzanne worked well together. However, shortly before the incident, they experienced disagreements over a photograph that Suzanne posted on her social media. Afterward, friends noticed tension between them, especially when Suzanne's relatives and friends learned about the death and the circumstances surrounding it. Many believed the incident was suspicious. By the time detectives began interviewing witnesses, several had already met with Scott. They found that he did not want to talk about the incident, which made the investigators even more suspicious. They now increasingly believe it was a deliberate murder. During this time, forensic experts visited Scott's home multiple times. They observed that he did not express any regret and appeared to be unemotional. While he often praised Suzanne as a talented businesswoman, he rarely acknowledged her qualities as a loving wife and mother. It seemed that his affection for her was more about their business partnership than about love. The morning after Suzanne was declared dead, Scott went to work as though nothing had happened, surprising the entire staff. Everything appeared the same as any other morning, and it seemed he wasn't troubled by the situation at all. Contrary to what everyone expected, he didn't take time off to grieve for his wife. The clinic's manager and several employees spoke with detectives, noting that Scott avoided discussions about Suzanne. Furthermore, Scott quickly began to change his appearance. Before Suzanne's death, he looked like an average balding man. But afterward, he underwent a hair transplant and now had a thick head of hair. His activity on social media also increased. He maintained his personal page without mentioning any sorrow over his wife's passing. In fact, he started going to the gym, dining out, and dressing well, giving the impression that he was looking for a new girlfriend and was indifferent to his wife's fate. Soon after, Scott started dating someone, and their relationship progressed quickly. However, the police felt they still lacked evidence. They needed to gather all the information and find new incriminating details. In 2018, the coroner's office provided the results of a thorough analysis. The forensic expert determined that the cause of Suzanne's death was strangulation, which left marks on her neck post-mortem. Additionally, DNA tests revealed a mix of blood from Suzanne and Scott in Mary's room, indicating a struggle and suggesting that Suzanne was attacked by Scott. On August 8, 2018, nearly 2 years after Suzanne's death, detectives visited Scott's house and directly asked him if he had killed his wife. He became visibly nervous, sweating and adopting a defensive posture. Scott denied the allegations regarding the blood, claiming he had injured himself while fixing the mosquito net on the door. However, this raised the question of how his wife's blood ended up there. Meanwhile, Mary stated that she had not seen any bloodstains until the police arrived and found her mother deceased. Although there was clear evidence of the crime, the officers were not in a rush to file charges. They decided that more evidence was needed, including examining Suzanne's phone. They believed that social media could provide important clues. After investigating, they discovered some disturbing details. Suzanne often had harsh reactions towards her husband, Scott. About 3 months before her death, she expressed feeling trapped in their relationship and wanted to end it. After that, she occasionally told her husband that they were not a good match. A month before her death, Suzanne confided in a friend about having a difficult relationship with Scott and her desire to leave him. However, she felt he was holding her back due to their joint business. According to her friend, a photo she had posted became a significant issue in their relationship. Scott was unhappy about the photo. When the police checked Scott's phone, they found a screenshot of this picture from August 30, 2016. It appeared that this revelation became the motive for the murder, fueled by jealousy. The police discovered that the day after Suzanne's death, Scott attempted to collect a $250,000 payment from her life insurance policy. However, his claim was denied because of suspicions of murder. On April 25, 2019, nearly 2 years after her death, Scott was arrested for the alleged murder. He was apprehended while preparing for another surgery and was detained, with bail set at $1 million. He quickly paid the bail and was released, waiting for trial. Then, a woman reported to the police that she had dated Scott while Suzanne was still alive. They initially met through social media, and it appeared he was very interested in her. However, he soon ended the relationship. A woman shared a text message she received from Scott 2 weeks after Suzanne's death, in which he expressed his desire to rekindle their relationship as he was now single. There are several motives for why Scott could have killed Suzanne: to gain money, to avoid dividing their assets in a potential divorce, or simply to remove her as an obstacle to dating other women. However, Scott's attorney argued that the text messages were simply a father's way of trying to find a new mother for his 2 children. In November 2023, 7 years after Suzanne's death, Scott Sills faced trial. Cameras were prohibited in the prosecutor's office but allowed in the courtroom. Scott appeared uncomfortable with the media attention, as he had faced significant scrutiny throughout this ordeal. He lost his medical license and seemed to be struggling emotionally. According to the prosecutor's office, on November 13, 2016, Scott attacked Suzanne at 4 a.m. when their son, Eric, heard the argument. He physically assaulted her multiple times and ultimately strangled her to death. He then staged the scene to make it look like she had fallen down the stairs, and he went to sleep, pretending not to know what happened the next morning. Despite this, Scott's lawyer presented a defense, indicating that he was determined to fight the charges. The attorney stated that Susan woke up that morning, tried to go to the kitchen to get a pan, and continued her daily activities. However, due to the effects of her migraine medication and her general weakness, she fell down the stairs and was injured by the family dogs. The dogs interpreted the situation as a game, tugging on the ends of the scarf around Suzanne's neck. As they pulled in different directions, they inadvertently strangled her, causing her to die relatively quickly. In an unexpected turn, Mary came forward to support Scott. She stated that when she left her room, she saw the dogs pulling on the scarf around Suzanne's neck, but initially did not comprehend the situation. She admitted that she had not spoken up sooner because she was just a child at the time of her mother's tragic death. Mary explained that she didn't realize the importance of the information regarding the scarf. She noted that they removed the scarf while providing first aid to her mother, which is why it ended up away from the body. The defense tested the scarf for dog DNA, which came back positive. Additionally, toxicology tests indicated that Suzanne had a mixture of sedatives and painkillers in her system, making her muscles difficult to control and overly relaxed after sleeping. In the days leading up to her fall, she had poor nutrition and felt weak, which could have contributed to an accidental fall that resulted in a neck injury, potentially leading to suffocation without help. The defense argued that the dogs played only a minor role in the case. They claimed that even if the dogs hadn't dragged the scarf, Suzanne could still have died since no one heard her fall or called for emergency assistance. However, the prosecution found this explanation unconvincing, stating that the noise from her fall should have been noticeable. They believed that Scott used the scarf to strangle her. In contrast, Mary claims that her mother, Suzanne, often uses the scarf to keep warm when she has a migraine, which helps her mother feel better. However, the prosecutor's office made its strongest argument that during their search of the house, they found no evidence that Susan had been on the stairs. If she had fallen down 4 meters of steps, there would likely have been blood or DNA traces, but none were found. The prosecution argued that Scott himself moved the body to make it look like a fall. They emphasized the positioning of Suzanne's body. Although the 911 dispatcher instructed Scott to perform CPR on a flat surface, when paramedics arrived, Suzanne's leg was still on the stairs. This indicated that he was not genuinely trying to help her, but was only pretending. Furthermore, the prosecution maintained that Scott had a strong motive, as a photo posted by Suzanne had sparked jealousy and anger. The jury testified in the 3-week trial. Ultimately, they had to reach a verdict. After hearing closing arguments from both the prosecution and defense and deliberating for 3 hours, the jury found 58-year-old Scott Sills not guilty of first-degree murder, but guilty of second-degree murder. This means that Scott, a man who has helped many women, has now been convicted of murdering his wife. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Upon hearing the verdict, Mary broke down in tears in the courtroom. She was heartbroken at the thought of losing her mother, while her father would spend the rest of his life in prison. She claimed that there was a mistake in the trial and was determined to seek justice with her defense attorney, but the sentence remained unchanged. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Alexandra Fossmo. Helge Fossmo was born on July 27, 1971, in a small village in central Sweden. He is one of 5 siblings. His parents were not religious, which is not often the case for people who follow a faith, as they are typically influenced by their families. However, Helge developed an interest in the church on his own. At the age of 12, he joined the youth group of his local religious community, and his parents supported his decision. They recognized his strong interest in the church and did not object. In fact, they later came to see it as a positive choice for their son. Helge describes the church as a source of salvation for him. Despite his young age, he was one of the most active members of the community, regularly attending church meetings and events. This involvement lasted for 5 years, until he began working at a Christian youth cafe in 1988. There, he met his first love, a girl named Helene. They were both attracted to each other, and their relationship progressed as they grew up. The couple eventually married and had 2 children. During this time, Helge continued to explore his faith and became a preacher in the local community. In 1993, a pivotal encounter took place. Helge met Asa Waldau, a woman who claimed to be the bride of Christ. She was the leader of a Christian sect. Asa hails from Knutby, where the cult originated, and travels from town to town preaching and gaining followers. Her main focus is on teenagers and young adults, making Helge's family an ideal target for recruitment. She consistently uses the same strategy to convince young people to leave their homes and join her church. However, their first meeting was not easy. When Asa approached Helge, a devoted Christian, he reacted harshly and expressed disbelief at the idea of a woman becoming a pastor. He found her beliefs and interpretation of the Bible too extreme for his taste. Despite this, Asa was determined not to give up. She saw potential in Helge's family and wanted to attract them to her group. Asa planned to proceed cautiously over the coming years. Asa spent a lot of time gaining the trust of Helge's family, assuring them that her community's activities were safe. At the same time, she began to influence their beliefs, especially Helge's. It took nearly 4 years, from 1993 to 1997, for Asa to convince Helge's family to accept her teachings and move to Knutby. At first, she treated it as a visit, giving them a tour of her church and explaining her work and goals in detail. Over time, Asa gained more and more attention from the family. The community she built provided jobs for those in need, and almost every member had specific responsibilities, many of which involved religious activities. This fostered a strong sense of community where everyone knew and supported each other. The residents of Knutby were a tight-knit group and welcomed Helgi and his family with open arms. Helgi resumed his previous role as pastor of the new church. It didn't take long for his sermons to reveal unconventional topics, often discussing taboo subjects like abuse and death. Some parishioners were skeptical of Helga's interpretation of the Bible. However, he persisted in his mission. 2 years after moving in, the Helgi family welcomed their third child, bringing more responsibility to everyone. To manage the increased workload, they decided to hire a nanny. After a short search, they chose Sarah Svensson, who had recently moved to the city. Sarah grew up in a Christian community and came from a religious family. Since childhood, she had struggled with severe allergies, which prevented her from living a normal life. During this time, her mother cared for her, and they developed a very close relationship. Sadly, her mother passed away after a long illness when Sarah was only 11 years old. This loss had a profound impact on Sarah, causing her to run away from home and become a troubled teenager. After her mother passed away, her father took on the responsibility of raising her. Although he had a busy job, he devoted all his free time to her. They shared a strong bond, but he could not fill the void left by her mother. Sarah stayed with her father until she happened to meet Asa while traveling from city to city for a Bible study. They quickly connected, and Sarah seemed like a good candidate to be accepted into the cult. Asa easily recognized her weaknesses and exploited them. Sarah then decided to move to Knutby to be closer to the church. During this time, Helgi grew closer to Asa than ever before. They often spent time together not only studying the Bible. The two of them received several messages from above, which they interpreted as prophecies sent by God. According to these messages, Helga was the King of Kings, and Asa was the Queen of Heaven. Asa insisted that marrying Helgi would allow for the creation of the Great Alliance, taking their faith to new heights. In 1999, a wedding-like ceremony took place between Helgi and Asa. During the ceremony, Helgi presented Asa with a ring containing 7 diamonds, a number that has sacred significance in many faiths. At the same time, Helga's legal wife, Helene, felt very jealous of the situation. This jealousy led to tension in their relationship. Asa intervened and criticized Helene for her jealousy, claiming that it was the worst emotion a true Christian could feel. She urged Helene to change her attitude, warning that the church could create serious problems for her, including the risk of losing her home. Meanwhile, the relationship between Helge and Asa became increasingly dysfunctional. Despite being married, Helge neglected his family and devoted all his time to Asa, especially after the ceremony. Asa showered him with affection and compliments, which deepened his feelings for her. Asa used this affection to control Helgi. She was subtle and effective in her approach, quickly taking control of almost every aspect of his life. Asa convinced Helga that he was the reincarnation of Jesus. These strange beliefs attracted attention and became increasingly extreme. The behavior of this unusual couple became more provocative. With Asa's manipulative tendencies, it was clear that this situation would not end well. On the morning of December 18, 1999, Helge and Helene had breakfast together. Afterward, Helge decided to lie down and rest, quickly falling asleep. While he was sleeping, he heard a knock on the door. When he woke up, he found that his wife was missing. A neighbor had come to check on him because they hadn't heard from him all day and were very worried. Helga opened the door and assured the neighbor that everything was fine. However, the neighbor wanted to see Helene, but she was not there either. He called out to her, but she did not respond. which worried Helge. He remembered that she had gone to take a bath and realized that she had been in there for a long time. Concerned, the two men decided to check on her, but Helene still did not respond when they called her name. They decided to unlock the bathroom door with a screwdriver. Inside, they found Helene lying face down in a bathtub full of water. The door was locked from the inside, and she was still wearing the nightgown she had on for breakfast. Helge screamed so loudly that he attracted the attention of several neighbors who came to his house. Together, they pulled her out of the water and attempted CPR, but sadly, it was too late. Helene was later pronounced dead at the age of 27. During the investigation, it was discovered that Helene had suffered severe head injuries. The medical examiner believed that her death could have been caused by several factors. The head injury may have caused her to lose consciousness, leading to asphyxiation. The toxicology report added further complications to the case, revealing a very high concentration of dextropropoxyphene in her body. This amount alone could have been fatal, but there was no indication that Helene had taken the drug, and its presence in her body remained a mystery. Although foul play was suspected, the police concluded that it was an accident. They believed that she had slipped, fallen, and hit her head on the faucet. The housekeeper, Sarah, played a key role in this conclusion, corroborating Helge's claim that Helene was alone in the bathroom and that no one could have harmed her. Helge appeared deeply saddened and genuinely mourned his wife's death. However, those who knew him well noticed some strange behavior. He quickly discarded all items related to his wife and seemed to forget her completely. He even forbade his children from mentioning their mother. Some speculated that Helene's death was not an accident. It was also revealed that Helge had influenced the results of the autopsy. He initially requested that an autopsy not be performed on religious grounds, but this request was denied due to the suspicious circumstances surrounding her death. He later insisted that the autopsy report not mention an opium overdose, claiming that this was necessary to prevent the implication that his wife might have taken her own life, which he believed would prevent her from going to heaven. He justified his actions by saying he wanted to protect Helene's reputation and that of family. During this time, Asa suddenly lost interest in Helge, leading to the end of their tumultuous relationship. She went on a pilgrimage to various cities and chose not to return. Meanwhile, Helge quickly found new love with a girl named Alexandra Waldau, Asa's sister. Their relationship developed rapidly, partly due to Helge's status. By this time, many people considered him to be close to God and treated him with great respect. In the spring of 2000, Alexandra moved into Helge's house, and soon after, the couple got married. However, Helge's need for intimacy grew stronger, and he was never satisfied with just one woman. In the spring of 2001, he began courting the children's nanny, Sarah, who still worked for Helge's family. She readily accepted his attention, viewing him as a respected person. At this time, the relationship between Sarah and Helge became clear. Helge actively took advantage of Sarah's kindness and often invited her to pray with him in church. During this period, he frequently relied on messages from God. Sarah was so infatuated with Helge that she accepted all his stories without question, even feeling a sense of divine inspiration in those moments. She truly believed that she was doing something good. However, the reality was that she had fallen into the trap of a manipulator who sought to exploit her while pretending to uphold spiritual values. His intentions were completely contrary to any religious principles. As their relationship developed, Helge began to make increasingly controversial statements, claiming that God fought on earth and that he was his warrior. He explained that this role was difficult, as it sometimes required removing various obstacles. Sarah naively believed everything he said because he was a pastor, and his sermons were considered messages from God. In reality, Helge was secretly planning something harmful. He began telling Sarah that God was sending him important messages, indicating that Alexandra would soon die. He manipulated Sarah into thinking that God had shown him she was the perfect mate for him. He also threatened Sarah by saying that he would die if he did not end his marriage to Alexandra. Although their marriage was falling apart, Helgi, as a pastor, could not get a divorce due to strict rules. Like many women around her, Sarah was drawn to his stories. These strange messages brainwashed Sarah, causing her to commit terrible acts. Helgi manipulated her, using his power in the church and exploiting her weaknesses. He learned many control tactics from Asa and applied them. At this time, many people genuinely believed that he was very close to God, so Helgi had no difficulty manipulating Sarah to his advantage. During this time, Helgi still lived with Alexandra, but they had separate rooms. Every night Helgi would be intimate with both women, alternating between them. He claimed this was part of a ritual to fight demons, portraying himself as God's messenger battling evil spirits. His persuasive words convinced the women of his role, and the arrangement continued until 2003. Alexandra and Helgi separated but continued to live together. However, they could not formally divorce because her husband wanted to keep her. During this time, Helgi's manipulation of Sarah intensified. He would often approach her only for intimacy and frequently insulted her. Despite this emotional abuse, he always ended with the words, "I love you." Sarah wanted to hear these words so much that she ignored his abuse. She seemed willing to do anything to gain God's approval, not realizing that her will was being manipulated, turning her into a puppet for a dangerous person. Helgi repeatedly confronts his lover, Sarah, about her intention to kill in the name of God. Sarah says she is not ready to do this. Helgi then decides to manipulate her further. He creates a new account on a messaging app and begins sending her messages from an unknown number, claiming that it is God trying to contact her. In these disturbing messages, she is warned that she does not have much time left and must kill in the name of God before November 25. At first, Sarah suspects that Helgi is behind these messages, but he vehemently denies it. He resorts to shaming her again, accusing her of lacking faith. Helgi then sends her messages claiming that she is destined to participate in a divine plan to lead souls to heaven. The next message asserts that this is the only path to her salvation. Eventually, this manipulation instills real fear in her soul, causing Sarah to commit a crime. On the night of November 8, 2003, Alexandra awoke in bed to find Sarah attacking her with a hammer. Remarkably, Alexandra fought off the attack. The reason for the attack was a message that Sarah believed she had received from God, instructing her to kill the pastor's wife. Surprisingly, Sarah was not punished for her actions, possibly because Helgi insisted that the incident be kept secret and not reported to the police. As a result, there was no official record of the attack, and the situation was covered up. Consequently, Helgi banished Sarah, declaring that she must live with her father for the rest of her life. Unfortunately, this did not affect Sarah's relationship with God. She continued to receive messages convincing her of the need to kill. Soon after these events, Helgi began a relationship with a neighbor named Annette Linde, who was married to Daniel Linde. Worried about his new rival, Helgi began sending Sarah messages demanding that she kill, accompanied by threats if she did not comply. Still under the influence of the messages from God, Sarah agreed to take up arms again. Helgi maintained complete control over his former lover Sarah, turning her into a puppet. Although she failed to fulfill God's plan the first time, she was given a second chance. This time, Sarah was better prepared. She bought weapons and learned how to make a silencer at home online. She diligently followed God's instructions, hoping to succeed and free her soul. On January 10, 2004, Sarah got into her father's car. Staying in touch with Helgi, she approached his house at 3:30 a.m., It is important to note that Alexandra was still living in Helga's house during this time. Sarah parked her car 500 meters away. To avoid detection, she wore a black mask and shoes of different sizes to distract the police. The front door was unlocked. Helgi had broken the lock first to make it look like a robbery. Alexandra was sleeping in bed, completely unaware of the danger she was in. Sarah entered Alexandra's room and attacked her. When Alexandra woke up screaming, Sarah opened fire, killing her on the spot. Then at 4:30 a.m., Sarah went to kill her next target, Daniel, the husband of Helga's new lover. He knew Daniel was home alone and informed Sarah about this. However, the door was locked. Sarah knocked on the door, and when Daniel opened it, she raised her gun and killed him without hesitation. After Daniel fell, she ran away, not knowing that he had survived, and was trying to call for help. When the police arrived, Daniel was still conscious enough to describe his attacker. At that time, Helga was already on the scene, wanting to help his neighbor. He accompanied Daniel to the hospital, where he learned that his wife had been killed. Helgi then began to act like a grieving husband. Unfortunately, the description Daniel gave of his attacker was unclear because she was wearing a mask, and he could not see her face clearly. Sarah gradually became the center of attention. A neighbor, who was not influenced by faith, recalled that Helga's first wife had died under similar mysterious circumstances. Then there was the hammer attack on his second wife, Alexandra. She may have been the victim of murder, but miraculously, she fought back. At the scene of Alexandra's attack and on Daniel's door, police found Sarah's bloody fingerprints, providing clear evidence of her involvement. Sarah insisted that she acted alone and that no one had encouraged her to do so. She later claimed that she had committed the crime in the name of God. When her phone was confiscated, police discovered Helgi's number as well as an unknown number. Although there were no messages from God, they did find a call from Helgi. After a thorough search, another cell phone was found in her home, containing numerous messages describing a disturbing and manipulative relationship with God. This phone contained over 1,000 text messages in which Sarah expressed her compulsion to kill. It was soon discovered that the unknown number belonged to Helga, a local church pastor. Sarah was devastated by the news, as she truly believed that her conversations on the messaging app were of divine origin. After learning the truth, she decided to share all the details with the police. Annette, the wife of the injured Daniel, was also suspected of being involved and was arrested. However, she was released 2 weeks later without charge when the police confirmed her innocence. During the trial, Helgi appeared arrogant, denied any wrongdoing, and showed no remorse for his actions. Psychiatrists evaluated him and determined that he was sane. The extent of his manipulation was staggering. The prosecution had enough evidence to convict Helga of inciting Alexandra's murder and the attempted murder of Daniel. Helge Fossmo was sentenced to life in prison, but was eligible for parole after 24 years. He has appealed several times over the years, all of which were rejected. He was also charged in connection with the death of his first wife, but he was acquitted due to insufficient evidence. In 2007, while in prison, Helge married for a third time, but the identity of his wife remains unknown. In an interview in August 2006, he confessed to being involved in Alexandra's death and the attempted murder of Daniel. He claimed that several other people helped organize the murder, but the case has never been reopened. Helge Fossmo is currently serving his sentence in Tidaholm prison in Sweden. During the trial, a video of the crime reenactment was played, in which Sarah detailed how she committed the crime. An edited version of the video was discovered during the private investigation and played in court. Although Sarah was the one who carried out the attack, inaccuracies in the reenactment raise questions about what really happened and who was responsible. There was suspicion that Helge may have been the real killer. Sarah Svensson was declared insane and committed to a psychiatric hospital. In 2011, her treatment ended, and she was released after doctors determined she was no longer a threat to society. Asa Waldau, a church leader, was convicted in 2020 of 8 counts of assaulting a former parishioner and sentenced to community service. After her experience, she changed her last name, started a new job, and stayed away from the church. Daniel survived the attack thanks to the efforts of doctors, but he chose not to return to the city because he feared the local church. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Alan Helmick. Alan Helmick, born in 1946 and raised in Colorado, developed a passion for sports, especially baseball, from an early age. After completing his education, he married his teacher, Sharon. Together, they raised a family, welcoming 3 daughters and a son. Alan became a successful businessman, starting a real estate company and then expanding into retail and the automotive industry, which helped his family thrive. Sharon was a devoted homemaker, taking care of the family. Their seemingly perfect marriage lasted for 30 happy years until tragedy struck in January 2003, when Sharon suddenly died of a heart attack. This loss was the deepest shock of Alan's life. He struggled with grief and depression for a long time. Even 2 years later, in 2005, the pain of her death still affected him. To cope, Alan focused on supporting his children and began taking ballroom dance classes, pursuing the dream that Sharon had wanted to share with him just before her death. During the classes in Grand Junction, Alan met Miriam Giles, a 48-year-old dance teacher who had recently moved to Colorado. Miriam had also suffered a great loss. Her daughter had died of an overdose in 2000, which was ruled an accident. Unable to bear the pain, Miriam's husband took his own life while she slept next to him. Hearing her story deeply affected Alan, as he could empathize with her pain, and their relationship blossomed into a romance. After a few weeks of getting to know each other, Miriam moved into Alan's home. They lived together for a few years before getting married in 2006 and started looking for a new place to live. Miriam, a horse enthusiast, convinced Alan to buy a large plot of land with a stable. They eventually found a location that was ideal for Alan, as it allowed him to run his business from an office closer than before. He showed his love for Miriam by showering her with gifts. From the outside, Alan and his wife appeared to be a happily married couple. However, Alan's daughter was concerned about the pace at which their relationship was progressing. Despite this worry, both Alan and Miriam seemed genuinely happy. On the day of the dance competition, Miriam felt unwell. While Alan was busy processing documents and signing papers, she frequently went to the bathroom. Eventually, she walked out to the parking lot where Alan was waiting in his car. Miriam wanted to get some things from the trunk. After opening the trunk and searching for a while, she felt unwell again and hurriedly went back inside. Meanwhile, Alan continued to wait in the car. Suddenly, he noticed smoke coming from the back of the car. At first, he thought it was just exhaust smoke and turned off the engine. However, the smoke became thicker and blacker. Realizing something was wrong, Alan got out of the car and saw a fire in the trunk. He quickly ran inside to get a fire extinguisher. On the way, he met Miriam, who was using a container to get water from the bathroom to put out the fire. The fire department was called and quickly arrived to extinguish the flames. When Alan checked the trunk, he found a burnt rope soaked in gasoline. This raised suspicions, indicating that the fire was intentionally set and not due to a car malfunction. The fire department interviewed witnesses and assessed the scene, concluding that only Miriam could have caused the fire. However, Alan firmly believes that this is impossible, but he could not ignore the possibility that an intruder had quietly approached the car. He refused to believe that his beloved wife would try to harm him, let alone kill him. He dismissed the incident as an accident, although he expressed some doubts. The event was quickly forgotten, and although there was still uncertainty after the fire, the couple's life returned to normal. Unfortunately, during this time, Alan fell ill. He spent most of May in bed, but by June, he was starting to feel a little better. Although he was diagnosed with hypertension, he began to adopt a more active lifestyle. Alan loved life and looked forward to the opportunity to return to the field when he regained his health. After a long illness, he seemed to be recovering. However, he did not answer missed calls. This continued until June 2008, when Alan's daughter attempted to contact her stepmother, Miriam. She was also unable to reach him, so she left a voicemail mentioning her plans to visit her father. Unfortunately, her efforts went ignored. On the evening of June 6, she continued to try to contact her father, noting that she had not been able to reach him for over a week. She called her stepmother back, but there was no answer. In the voicemail, she asked her stepmother to inform her father that she wanted to see him and was concerned about his well-being. Despite living nearby, all of her attempts to contact him went unanswered, making it unclear why she did not go to the farm to check on him in person. At approximately 8 a.m. on June 10, 2008, Miriam left the house to go to the local Walmart. After shopping, she contacted her horse trainer. At approximately 9 a.m., Miriam called her husband, Alan, and left a voicemail saying that she loved him and planned to pick up groceries before meeting him at a nearby Chinese restaurant at 10 a.m. Alan did not respond to her message. Miriam tried to call him back but could not reach him and asked him to call her. By 11 a.m., Miriam was at the Chinese restaurant waiting for Alan. After about 15 minutes, she called him a third time, feeling increasingly anxious and upset that he did not answer. She decided to go home with her groceries. As she entered the laundry room from the garage by her usual route, she was surprised to see an overturned trash can. When she looked around the corner, she saw Alan's legs sticking out. Miriam saw her husband lying motionless on the floor, which frightened her. She dropped her belongings, began to cry, and immediately called the police. She told them that she had returned home from shopping and found her husband dead in the living room. Although she was initially certain that Alan was dead, she followed the operator's instructions to perform CPR. However, she felt it was in vain because he was unresponsive. A patrol car arrived at the Miriam family home. The police found Alan lying on the floor. The officer noted that Alan was cold to the touch and had no pulse. There was blood nearby, and the officer observed several open cabinet drawers and a trash can that had been knocked over. A .25 caliber shell casing was also found. When his wife Miriam was taken away from the scene for questioning and photographs, the police found it odd that she was completely clean, despite her claim that she had attempted CPR on her husband as requested. When questioned, Miriam admitted that she had washed her hands after administering first aid. However, the kitchen sink was found to be completely clean and dry, leading the police to believe that she had lied. They suspected that she had not actually tried to help her husband and had only pretended to do so during the phone call. In addition, her calm and even cold demeanor only added to the police's suspicions. Miriam, who has now been taken to the police station for further questioning, recounted the events of that tragic day from the beginning. She confirmed that she had woken up early, made coffee, and talked to her husband on the terrace. They discussed their plans for the day. After the conversation, she took a shower and made the final adjustments to her shopping list before going out to buy household items. It was a normal day, and she had called her horse trainer and, following his advice, bought carrots for the animals. When she first tried to call her husband, he did not answer, which was unusual for him. After the third call, she became alarmed and slightly angry. When she returned home, she found her husband lying on the floor. Confused as to what had happened, she immediately called the police. Miriam mentioned that Alan's son, Alan Jr., was at their house and had left for work around 6 a.m. The conversation then turned to Alan Jr., who had been living in their house for several weeks. He would come home after his shift. Alan Jr. had a separate room and used a different entrance to his room. He occupied part of the first floor and tended to live in isolation. At the time of the incident, Miriam had not seen Alan Jr. for about 4 days. She suspected that he was not getting along with Alan, but she did not provide any strong evidence to support this belief. Just before the incident, his son, Alan Jr., had come to visit him from Alaska. They had some paperwork to take care of. Miriam mentioned that they were experiencing problems. However, at the last minute, things took an unexpected turn. Alan had banned his son from coming and warned Miriam to call the police if Alan Jr. showed up at their house. Miriam said that Alan Jr. was in a dispute over the ownership of the stove and that his father had spoken out against him. This situation contributed to the deterioration of the relationship between father and son, and they did not see each other. She acknowledged the possibility that Alan Jr. might have threatened her father, but she was unsure of the specifics. It seemed that Miriam was trying to blame Alan Jr. The police discovered a particularly strange detail in Miriam's story. She could not even remember the addresses or ages of her husband's children, which was very unusual. Alan Jr.'s alibi was later verified, clearing him of suspicion. Other family members claimed there had been no conflict between Alan and his son, making it clear that Miriam's story was a lie. The police began to follow her movements around the city on the day of the incident. They found it strange that she made some unusual trips, especially when she went across town just to buy a bag of carrots, which was clearly not enough for their horses. They pointed out that the vegetables could easily have been purchased at Walmart. This behavior led the police to suspect that she might be trying to create an alibi to explain her long absence from home. Miriam became the prime suspect. In response to the detectives' questions, she said that they had a prenuptial agreement stating that all property acquired before the marriage would go to his children. She hinted that Alan might have been the victim of a robbery. Miriam observed that some shelves had been pulled out and found her husband's wallet left in the kitchen. Normally, the wallet contained several $100s in cash and several credit cards, but it was now missing. Their house was filled with valuables, but they never locked their doors. Miriam claimed that they never used locks or keys. Miriam stated that her husband had no enemies and that their neighbors were decent people. However, she also claimed that she was not involved in her husband's romantic affairs, so she could not provide details about any potential rivals Alan might have encountered. During questioning, Miriam revealed that Alan owned a gun collection. She also mentioned that Alan had struggled with health issues. She noted that he had quit smoking about a year before the incident due to high blood pressure and that his health had declined since then. Furthermore, he had been taking antidepressants to cope with emotional difficulties stemming from the death of his first wife. Miriam insisted that Alan had no enemies. However, she mentioned a minor dispute that occurred a few weeks before the incident with a contractor who was working on their property. Alan had asked for a handwritten invoice and then delayed payment for several weeks, but the debt was eventually settled. The police inquired whether there was any insurance policy on her husband. Miriam was unsure, but mentioned that Alan owed investors about $400,000 for various projects. This raised suspicions, as she had previously stated that she was unaware of her husband's financial problems. Unexpectedly, Miriam asked the police if they suspected her of being guilty, to which they responded that they had some doubts about her story. In response, she produced a large stack of receipts from various locations in the city where she had made purchases on the day of the murder, as if to demonstrate that she had meticulously collected evidence to support her alibi. After questioning, Miriam's clothing from the night of the murder was collected and tested for gunpowder residue. She was then released. During the autopsy, The medical examiner discovered a gunshot wound to the back of Alan's head. No gunpowder residue was found on his skin. Alan died instantly from the wound, falling to the ground with bruising on his head, arms, and body. There were no defensive wounds, suggesting that he had been attacked by surprise. Toxicology revealed the presence of caffeine and nicotine, but no alcohol, illegal drugs, or prescription medications were detected. It was clear that this was a homicide. An expert determined that Alan had died several hours before the police arrived at the house, around 8 to 9 a.m. His wife left the house around that time, suggesting that she may have been involved in the crime, but there were no traces of blood or gunpowder on her clothes or hands. However, traces of gunpowder were found at the scene, suggesting that Miriam may have changed clothes and cleaned up. The police accessed Alan's cell phone. Earlier that morning, his daughter had called him to discuss some documents and a meeting to sign them. There were also calls from unknown numbers, possibly creditors who had contacted him after hearing about the tragedy. In addition, the phone had received many calls from friends and family. To gather more information, the police interviewed the housekeeper, who had known the Alan family for many years. The housekeeper had cleaned the house and had met Alan before his first wife died. She recalled that she had last been to their home on June 9, 2008, just one day before the murder. She confirmed that the door was usually unlocked, allowing her to enter and begin cleaning as usual. However, she noticed that Alan was acting unusually. He was normally very talkative, but that day he ignored her presence and did not even greet her. He seemed very nervous and did not make eye contact when he sat down at the table. Shortly after, a strange man arrived, leading her to believe that there was a problem in the couple's relationship. Unfortunately, she was unable to provide any further useful information. The police decided to look into Miriam's background and discovered some interesting information. After the tragic deaths of her daughter and husband, she faced legal troubles that forced her to sell her assets to settle lawsuits. When the police spoke to a family member, they learned that there were indeed financial problems, largely due to Miriam's extravagant spending habits. Alan was a successful businessman who provided generously for his children, but the purchase of a horse stable and a dance studio, along with the high cost of maintaining the horses, had left them financially devastated. The situation became even more suspicious when, on the same day his car caught fire, Miriam discovered that he had sold his business to pay off debts and had just received the money before they set off. Interestingly, Miriam had excused herself to go to the bathroom just before the fire broke out. It seemed that she had lost interest in her husband because of their financial troubles and decided to take his money and stay away from him. In addition, none of Alan's relatives were able to contact him in his final days. Alan's daughters felt that Miriam was trying to prevent them from reaching out to their father. The more the police spoke to Alan's relatives, the more inconsistencies and falsehoods they discovered in Miriam's testimony. At the time, the police believed that Miriam had a financial motive. However, Miriam claimed that she did not benefit from her husband's death due to their prenuptial agreement. According to the agreement, all of Alan's assets would be divided among the children, but the house they bought during their marriage was considered community property. This meant that Miriam could claim half of it if her husband died, which was a significant amount of money. Many witnesses believed that Alan's wife was the only person capable of killing him. Some suspected that his sudden decline in health shortly before his death was related to an attempted poisoning. These suspicions were partly supported by the fact that his symptoms were consistent with those of poisoning. However, an autopsy found no toxins in his system. It is possible that the toxins had been processed by his body during his long illness. Additionally, another daughter of Alan, who had been living with her father and stepmother for some time, observed Miriam using Alan's mobile phone without permission. Alan's daughter believed that Miriam had disconnected the phone preventing Alan from contacting his family. This behavior became apparent during the time when Alan's relatives were unable to reach him. The police investigated the deaths of Miriam's daughter and her ex-husband, Jack Giles, and found them to be highly suspicious. The daughter died of a drug overdose, but it is unclear how she obtained the fatal dose. She had a close relationship with her father, but was estranged from her mother, which contributed to Jack's depression. He died 2 years later under unusual circumstances. He had been shot in the right side of the head, although he was left-handed. During this time, Miriam was the sole beneficiary of life insurance policies for both her daughter and Jack, leading the family to suspect a connection between their deaths. Miriam quickly received and spent the insurance money, but 6 months later, a court ordered her to give half of Jack's insurance money to his child from a previous relationship. After Jack's death, Miriam left Florida for Colorado, where she married Alan Hemlick. A disturbing development arose when it was revealed that she had a history of fraud, including attempts to cash counterfeit checks and being implicated in several burglaries. When police investigated her background, they discovered a long history of legal troubles in various states, where she had used multiple false identities to engage in illegal activities. Although she claimed that she would inherit nothing but the house if Alan died, police discovered a $250,000 life insurance policy in his name. Furthermore, shortly before Alan was murdered, Miriam attempted to increase the coverage to $2 million. However, when she tried to claim the money after Alan's death, she was informed that she could not do so because he had been late with his payments earlier in the year. The payment issue arose because Miriam had restricted Alan's use of his cell phone, causing him to miss payment reminders. 2 weeks after the murder, Miriam's best friend reported some disturbing experiences. Miriam called, sounding frightened, and explained that someone had broken into her home while she was at work. A friend offered her a place to stay. The next day, they decided to go to Alan's house together. There, they discovered a yellow envelope with a postcard hidden under the carpet. The postcard, written in a scrawl with many errors, ominously stated that Alan was the next victim, not the last, in Miriam's life. Feeling threatened, Miriam quickly contacted her lawyer. Although she feared for her life, she expressed concern that the letter writer might return to her home. She also mentioned seeing strange cars parked nearby and hearing unusual noises the night before the murder. Police examined the note and found it was written on a rare type of postcard, which led them to the place of purchase. Within days, they had surveillance footage confirming that Miriam had bought the postcard and sent it to herself. The store clerk even remembered her. The investigation revealed that Miriam had harmed her own parents. First, she robbed her father and even burned down his house. Then she went to her mother's house, who lived in another state, and robbed her before fleeing to Mississippi. Miriam had also stolen from Alan several times, leading to suspicious transactions on his account. A bank employee noticed these irregularities and tried to inform Alan, but he was unaware of the situation because his wife had hidden her phone. It was discovered that more than $140 had been withdrawn from Alan's account, although he had not made any significant purchases. This was unusual, as all of his associates stated that Alan often planned large purchases in advance and discussed them with his accountant. The day before his death, Alan appeared very upset, perhaps because he had learned about the unauthorized withdrawals, which could have caused him considerable stress. Could this situation have led to a murder? When the police decided to arrest Miriam for the murder, they discovered that she had left Colorado and was staying at her son's house in Florida. Miriam had taken her belongings from Alan's house with her. She quickly registered on a dating website, stating that she was looking for a wealthy man who earned at least $500,000 a year to meet her needs. During the investigation, police found several searches on Alan's computer related to horse euthanasia. There were numerous searches for medical drugs used for this purpose, including dosages of sleeping pills and poisons. along with information about their dangers. This was concerning because Alan had nothing to do with horses. It was his wife who cared for them. It appeared that she was the one searching for this information, raising suspicions that Alan may have been the victim of poisoning. Police suspicions were confirmed when it was learned that Miriam's family had no sick horses that needed euthanasia. On November 8, Miriam Giles was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The prosecution had a substantial amount of evidence for the case, but relied heavily on circumstantial evidence. It is believed that Miriam had been trying to kill her husband for a long time. She was also suspected of attempting to blow up Alan's car while he was inside it. This incident may have prompted the police to begin their investigation. At the time, the film No Country for Old Men was popular, featuring a villain who blows up a car. The prosecution theorized that Miriam had been inspired by the film and attempted to kill Alan in a similar manner. A DVD of the film was actually found in their home. On December 12, 2008, bail was set at $2 million, and Miriam remained in jail. It was discovered that she had used several forged documents, including a passport and a driver's license. The prosecutor insisted that her entire life had been based on deception. Many of her statements during interviews were presented to the jury, along with numerous instances of her lying and her extensive criminal record that contributed to Alan's death. However, the prosecution relied heavily on circumstantial evidence to support the murder charge. The defense argued that there was no concrete evidence that Miriam used a gun to shoot her husband, and that the murder weapon was never found. After witnessing the defense's desperate attempts to prove Miriam's innocence, the jury ultimately found her guilty. Miriam Giles was convicted of first-degree murder and arson of her father's house, in addition to multiple counts of document forgery. After a brief deliberation, the court sentenced Miriam to 108 years in prison. The prosecutor's office then attempted to charge her with the murder of her first husband, Jack, as she was the prime suspect. However, the evidence gathered during the investigation was deemed insufficient, and no charges were filed. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Angelica Graswald. On the evening of April 19, 2015, Angelica Graswald and Vincent Villafor went kayaking. Both enjoyed an active lifestyle and outdoor activities, with kayaking being one of their favorites. Their relationship, which had grown over the years, was strengthened by their shared passion. That day, the couple decided to kayak across the Hudson River to Bannerman Island. They enjoyed their time there, but around 7 p.m., they decided it was time to head home. However, the wind picked up on the Hudson River, creating waves about a meter high, which posed a significant challenge to their kayak. Despite the risk, Angelica and Vincent decided to turn back because they did not have the necessary equipment to stay overnight on the island. Initially, they managed to navigate the strong waves, but as they reached the other shore, Vincent's kayak began to fill with water. The situation was worsened by the fact that Vincent was not wearing a life jacket and the water was extremely cold. In April, the river had not yet warmed up, and darkness was approaching, which posed a significant risk. Vincent shouted to Angelica to call 911 as he was already in the water and struggling to stay afloat. At approximately 7:30 p.m., on April 19, 2015, Angelica called 911, sounding desperate. She explained that she was on the Hudson River with her fiancé, who had fallen into the water. She said that he did not have any life-saving equipment and that the strong winds and waves made it impossible for her to swim to him. Angelica was extremely concerned, emphasizing that Vincent was being swept away by the current and was in danger of drowning, and she urgently called for help. When rescuers arrived, Vincent was no longer visible from the shore. The rescuers were shocked that the young couple had chosen to kayak in such harsh conditions. Angelica was cold, and they helped her warm up while they began searching for Vincent. The situation appeared to be a tragic accident. Angelica sat on the shore and cried, unable to find Vincent. She was devastated by his disappearance. The couple had planned their wedding, and now their dreams of a future together seemed shattered. The police spoke to her to gather details of what had happened, but she was in shock, making it difficult for her to calm down. Vincent's relatives and friends claimed that he was extremely skilled and knew how to handle waves of all sizes. The circumstances surrounding Vincent's disappearance were so strange that several people reported the couple's relationship to the police. Their relationship had recently deteriorated, and there had been numerous reports about it. As a result, the police felt compelled to conduct a thorough investigation. However, in order to reach any firm conclusions, they needed to locate Vincent's body and his kayak. The police then interviewed Angelica again. Angelica agreed to come to the station for questioning, unaware of how much this conversation would affect her life. At 35, Angelica was an attractive woman. Originally from Latvia, she had always sought work opportunities abroad for better prospects. Although she had been married and divorced twice, she had never given up on her dream of a new life. Eventually, luck was on her side when she secured a job as a nanny in the United States. This job suited her perfectly, as Angelica was kind, caring, and calm, which allowed her to bond well with children. During this time, Angelica met Vincent, who was also twice divorced and 46 years old. Vincent had built a successful career in the construction industry and was quite wealthy. Some acquaintances believed that she was using Vincent to secure her position in the United States by marrying an American. Vincent was generous and loved to throw parties. A few weeks after they met, Angelica moved into Vincent's home in Kips Bay, New York. Their relationship quickly progressed, and they began to discuss marriage and children. While Angelica looked for a new job, Vincent worked to provide for her needs. Their life was stable until a tragic accident occurred. Vincent and Angelica attended a party with friends the day before the tragic kayaking accident. During the party, Angelica left early, saying she was not feeling well. She spent most of the evening alone and had little interaction with others. Vincent's friends observed some tension between the couple, noting a minor argument, but nothing serious. The next morning, they met again. That evening, Vincent shared his kayaking plans with his friends, but they were unable to change his mind due to his stubbornness. Despite the cold weather, the next day, Vincent suggested they make up and go on vacation to the Hudson, and Angelica agreed immediately. The couple had planned to take photos at Bannerman Castle, which was located in the middle of the river. Angelica had brought some nice outfits for the photo shoot. By 4 p.m., they had reached the riverbank and were ready to leave for the island. Angelica noticed that the wind had picked up considerably. It was cold, and rain was in the forecast, but that didn't stop them. The couple enjoyed extreme sports and felt confident because they had paddled in similar conditions before. Angelica's timeline was confirmed by the photos they took. She mentioned that they had had a few beers beforehand. They both drank enough to enjoy themselves while ensuring they were sober when they got home to drive. During questioning, Angelica told the police that she knew there was a problem with the drain plug on Vincent's kayak. He needed to replace it, but she did not check it before they left. The journey to the castle was difficult, and Vincent often passed her. The pair made good use of the large waves. However, on the way back, Angelica noticed that Vincent had suddenly fallen far behind. The waves grew higher, and suddenly he started calling out to her, asking her to contact rescuers. When Angelica turned around, she saw that Vincent's kayak was taking on water and starting to sink. Vincent struggled to stay afloat while the current carried Angelica toward the shore, making it impossible for her to return to help him. She had no choice but to go to shore to call for rescue. By then, Vincent had disappeared from sight. They searched for Vincent all night, and the next day, a search operation continued. Divers scoured the river for his body, while boats equipped with sonar scanned the water. Search teams worked throughout the day despite the fog and high waves. Rescue helicopters were also deployed. Vincent's family was shocked and distraught by his disappearance. Among them, Angelica appeared the calmest. She continued to post various photos and videos on social media, which seemed out of place given the circumstances. When asked, she said she still hoped Vincent would be rescued and remained positive. However, his relatives felt she was indifferent to the severity of the situation. Meanwhile, searchers knew that almost no one, not even a skilled athlete, could survive in such harsh conditions. 10 days after Vincent went missing, Angelica was called in for further questioning. She casually mentioned that she might have removed the drain plug from Vincent's kayak when they returned. This led the police to suspect that his disappearance might not have been accidental, and that she might have been involved in his drowning. She also mentioned that Vincent's oar was broken, which she had tried to fix. According to her statement, she had removed the fixing ring from the oar blade. The police believed that the unscrewed drain plug and the broken oar suggested that Angelica might have wanted to kill him. However, they could not understand her motive, as killing someone before marrying him seemed absurd, especially since she did not yet have citizenship or inheritance rights to his property. To gather more information about Angelica, the police decided to interview her acquaintances, which led them to her ex-boyfriend. He was shocked to hear that Angelica might be a murderer. However, the investigation had only just begun. He admitted that Angelica had a darker side. He recalled several times they had drunk together, during which Angelica often caused conflict. He described her as manipulative, noting that she did not want him to go out without her. During questioning, Angelica admitted that there were indeed problems in her relationship. She believed that these problems were related to Vincent's need for intimacy. She expressed that they should break up. The police soon identified a possible motive for the murder. Angelica inherited about $500,000 from his life insurance policy, of which she was named the primary beneficiary. This money could have solved her financial difficulties and helped her start over, especially since she was unemployed. Despite the overwhelming evidence against her, Angelica maintained her innocence. She was arrested and released on bail before her trial, facing a charge of second-degree murder. Her attorney argued that the confession obtained during an 11-hour interrogation should not be considered valid. The defense attorney emphasized the autopsy and its results to determine if there were signs of violence, which would be necessary to establish the murder charge. He claimed that the incident was an unfortunate accident. The attorney believed that the kayak likely capsized due to the waves, or that the drain plug came loose when the kayak was hit by the waves. There was also discussion of the strong winds, cold water, and lack of a life jacket. However, Angelica was wearing a life jacket and took precautions for her safety, unlike Vincent. Vincent, on the other hand, had no regard for his own safety and was drunk, which may have influenced his actions. To counter the prosecutor's claims, the attorney conducted an investigation on the Hudson River. He had a man of similar build to Vincent use a similarly styled kayak to demonstrate how low the water level was in the small boat. The attorney argued that large waves could have quickly flooded the kayak, even without the drain plug being removed. Drunken Vincent may have made several mistakes despite his skill and training, suggesting that the incident should be considered an accident. There is some debate about whether the kayak could have absorbed enough water to sink quickly several miles from shore. The drain plug was particularly controversial. It was a small hole, about the size of a pinky finger, located on the top of Vincent's model kayak. This raises the question of whether a significant amount of water could have entered through the hole if it had been left open. To investigate this theory, additional tests were conducted using the same kayak model and a mannequin of the same weight and size as Vincent. Tests were performed to determine how much water could have entered through the open drain plug while the rest of the kayak was sealed. The results showed that the hole was too small. Each wave that struck the kayak only allowed a few drops of water to enter. Therefore, they were able to paddle several kilometers to safety. A small hole would certainly not have been enough to sink the entire kayak. The lawyer argued that Vincent's kayak could have capsized due to the strong waves, especially considering his level of intoxication. This explanation seemed more plausible than the theory that it had flooded because of the drain plug. During questioning, Angelica admitted that she had removed the drain plug from Vincent's kayak. This raised suspicions that she had done so to cause trouble for her fiancé, who was considering calling off the wedding. The potential life insurance payout could have seemed like a path to a better future for her. The defense believed that Angelica's comments led the police to charge her with murder. The police had dismissed the possibility of an accident, despite clear evidence of bad weather. To address this issue, the attorneys called in an expert with years of experience working with criminals. This expert scrutinized every detail of Angelica's 11-hour interrogation. The expert believes that the police repeatedly violated the rules of interrogation. They clearly pressured Angelica, causing her to give false statements. During her conversation with the police, Angelica mentioned that she adjusted and tried to tighten the drain plug. However, throughout the recording, there is no clear confession to the murder. The frightened and exhausted girl fell into a trap by misunderstanding some of the police's vague questions. The interrogation mainly involved the police trying to get Angelica to repeat what she had said on the island where Vincent drowned. The expert noted that she was clearly frightened, slightly intoxicated, and traumatized by witnessing her lover drown. In such a state, it would be unreasonable to interpret her statements as evidence of guilt. However, when she arrived at the station, the police put considerable pressure on her, focusing particularly on the words she had said near the Hudson River. An expert interrogator observed clear signs of manipulation during the interrogation. Through many leading questions, the police discovered that the underlying motive was anger over Vincent's unorthodox views on intimacy. Police explained Angelica's actions by mentioning her touching the boat's drain plug, which they believe led to Vincent's drowning. The expert suspected that Angelica's confession was coerced, although not through physical violence. The police employed many classic interrogation techniques to extract a confession. When Angelica finally mentioned that she had thought about getting out of the relationship, the police treated this as a confession to murder. However, contrary to the prosecutor's belief, she never used the word murder during the conversation at the station. After the police heard what they wanted, they ignored all of Angelica's other statements. In fact, she claimed that this was not the first time she had encountered problems with the kayak. The issues had started a few months before the Vincent's crash. In the winter, the button had been missing for a while, and during that time, they visited the reservoirs and floated without any problems. Unfortunately, the police noticed inconsistencies in Angelica's testimony. She initially said that there was a button, but then insisted that there was none. This inconsistency caused the police to intensify their questioning. The key moment in the interrogation that the expert examined was when Angelica began to break down. She cried and expressed a need to care for her cat at home. After a grueling 11 hours at the police station, she looked exhausted. The police seemed to see her emotional state as an opportunity to extract a confession to the murder. They increased the pressure and asked her leading questions. Ultimately, however, Angelica did not confess to the crime. The expert concluded that the erroneous answers given during questioning were misleading. Angelica's anxiety and intense desire to escape the unpleasant situation caused her to give some inaccurate answers. She did not know that these answers would be used to build a case against her for a murder she did not commit. On the morning of Saturday, May 23, 2015, Vincent's body was discovered a month after his disappearance in the Hudson River. A boatman found the body a few miles downstream from Bannerman Island, where the couple had been visiting that fateful day. An autopsy was performed, and the medical examiner determined that Vincent had drowned. He likely died from the cold water and strong currents, which made it difficult for him to stay afloat. There were no signs of violence, physical assault, or strangulation on his body. However, there was some alcohol in his blood, although not in excessive amounts. They also started looking for the kayak in that direction. After a while, they found it drifting a few hundred meters away. It turned out that Vincent's kayak had lost its drain plug. They found the paddle, and it was still usable. The defense argued that the lack of a drain plug and problems with the paddle could not have caused the drowning. They claimed that only when combined with other factors, such as water temperature, wind conditions, the absence of a life jacket, and the influence of alcohol, could Vincent's situation have led to the tragedy. The prosecutor's office then focused on inconsistencies in Angelica's testimony, believing that they pointed to her involvement in the murder. The attorney argued that the incident was an accident due to Vincent's own negligence. He had been intoxicated in rough waters and was not wearing a life jacket. Vincent was fully aware that the water was cold, and that if he fell in, his chances of survival would be virtually non-existent. Angelica maintained her innocence, but the situation soon changed. The prosecutor's office began to realize that proving she had attempted murder by pulling the drain plug from his kayak would be too difficult. This weak evidence made it challenging for them to convince a jury of her guilt. Meanwhile, Angelica's defense attorney worked extensively with experts, presenting strong factual arguments to support her case. Angelica was offered a plea deal to plead guilty to involuntary manslaughter. Under state law, second-degree murder is punishable by life in prison, while charges involving negligent conduct or accidents are punishable by 1 to 4 years in prison. Given the time she had already spent in custody, her attorney advised her to accept the deal. Angelica agreed, and her confession helped her avoid a jury trial. She was eventually sentenced to 4 years in prison, most of which she served while awaiting trial. On December 21, 2017, Angelica was paroled after serving 32 months. Vincent's family and friends were unhappy with the decision, still believing she had killed her fiancé. Despite their accusations, Angelica maintained her innocence, claiming that only she and God knew the truth. After her release, she sought peace, but faced the threat of deportation and challenges in finding employment. Angelica attempted to claim benefits from Vincent's insurance policy, but her earlier guilty plea made this impossible. She was then forced to return to her home country. There, she enrolled in college, found a job, and resumed her life, fully recovering from the trauma of her past. Hello, true crime enthusiasts. Today, we will investigate another intriguing case, the case of Michael Wayne Jones. In 2019, the Jones family lived in a house next to Highway 27 in Summerfield, Florida, which is located in Marion County. The family included Father Michael, Mother Cassie, and their 4 children, Cameron, Preston, Mercalli, and Ayanna, who were between 1 and 10 years old. Cameron and Preston are Cassie's children from a previous relationship, while Mercalli and Ayanna are Michael's biological children. Michael was born on May 1, 1981 and grew up in Vermont. He had a difficult childhood marked by a poor upbringing and abuse from his father. Although his father was eventually imprisoned, his mother began a new relationship with a man who was just as abusive. When he grew up, Michael joined the United States Marine Corps as a medic. During this time, he met his first wife and became a family man, having 3 children with her. After several years of working, Michael's wife helped him get a job at a local veterinary clinic. It was there that he discovered his passion for managing a veterinary practice. During this time, he met Cassie, who had a very different background. Cassie was born on December 23, 1986, into a loving family with parents named Nikki and David, who provided her with a good upbringing. After graduating from high school, she moved to Florida in 2009. Cassie began her career in dog grooming, starting as a groomer and later becoming a veterinary technician. Friends described her as an amazing, kind, and caring person who would readily help others. Cassie and Michael first met at the veterinary clinic, which led to a significant change in their lives. Michael had a troubled past. In 2015, he was arrested for burglary after stealing money, computer equipment, and a firearm from the veterinary clinic where he worked alongside Casey. Despite this, Casey forgave him and supported him during this challenging period, even when he fled to New Mexico to escape arrest. Their professional relationship developed into a friendship and eventually blossomed into a romantic relationship. This prompted both of them to leave their previous partners and start a new family together. Michael became a stepfather to Casey's 2 children, while leaving his own children with his ex-wife. Michael and Casey welcomed their own children in December 2016 and August 2018. After marrying on Halloween in 2017, the family moved into a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom trailer in Summerfield, Florida. Although the space was limited for their family of 6, they were happy together and found the rent affordable. Casey was a dedicated mother who prioritized her children's growth and happiness. To capture joyful moments, she created a YouTube channel to share memorable photos and videos of her children as they grew. Many of these videos showed Michael playing with his daughters, having fun with Casey, and enjoying weekends together. He appeared calm and generally content with his life. In those moments, Casey's laughter rang out, suggesting that their life seemed carefree and joyful. On July 10, 2019, the seemingly perfect life of Casey began to unravel. Her friends noticed something was wrong when she stopped responding to their calls and went silent. When she eventually sent messages on social media, her friends became concerned because the messages didn't match her usual tone. The first person Casey cut off contact with was her ex-husband, Richard Bowers, who is also the father of her sons, Preston and Cameron. On July 27, when Richard went to pick up his boys for a scheduled visit, he noticed Casey wasn't home. When he asked Michael, who was at the house, about her, he was told she was out of town. Since Richard and Casey had previously agreed that she wanted distance, he left with their children without any concerns. On August 1, Casey's mother, Nikki, received a strange message from an unknown number, asking if she could care for Casey's daughters, Mercali and Ayana, for a couple of weeks. Nikki agreed, but she never saw her daughter again. When Michael dropped off the children at Nikki's house, it felt unusual to her that he was the only one delivering them, especially since she hadn't heard from Casey in over 3 weeks. At this time, Michael stayed home and cared for his first 2 children with his previous wife, Sarah. On August 11, the children returned home with Sarah, while Cameron and Preston remained with Michael. Weeks went by without anyone seeing or hearing from Casey, and Michael took care of all the household chores. The situation became more concerning when it was noticed that Preston and Cameron were also missing. During this time, Michael listed twin mattresses for sale, and buyers from a nearby area expressed interest. On August 17, the buyers arrived at Michael's residence to pick up the mattresses, but the encounter was not normal. The mattresses smelled of death and Michael acted strangely, leading to a failed sale. On August 22, Richard, the biological father of Preston and Cameron, congratulated his son on his birthday, but received no response. A few days later, Casey's other children, Mercali and Ayana, also stopped communicating. Amid these unsettling incidents, the Michael family received an eviction notice, requiring them to vacate their rental property within 2 weeks. Soon after, Hurricane Dorian made landfall in Florida and surrounding areas. The storm was so strong that it was classified as a Category 5 hurricane and is considered the strongest hurricane to have ever made landfall in the northwestern Bahamas in recorded history. A state of emergency was declared across Florida, prompting many to seek shelter or evacuate. Michael was one of those who left the area, heading north to stay with his ex-wife, Sarah, and their children. Although Michael stayed for 10 days, Sarah never saw him contact Casey or the children. While she didn't approve of this, she was aware that Michael and Casey were experiencing problems, so she didn't intervene. After the hurricane passed and the Michael family remained away from home, neighbors reported a terrible smell emanating from their house. The homeowner was notified and knew that Michael's family had supposedly moved out. However, when he looked out the window, he saw that the house was still full of furniture and personal belongings. It was scary, and the air around the house was filled with a strong stench, like something was dead and decomposing. Initially, Casey's family and friends suspected that Michael was trying to go into hiding for legal reasons, causing the family to feel the need to go into hiding for protection. Therefore, they did not report her disappearance to the police. However, on September 14, 2014, her mother, Nikki, decided to contact the Marion County Sheriff's Office. It had been 66 days since anyone had heard from Casey, 34 days since Cameron and Preston were last seen, and 17 days since Mercalli and Ayana were last heard from. Understandably, the police were very worried and promptly began an investigation. When the police arrived at the Michael family's home around midnight, local residents informed them that no one had seen the family for a long time. They also reported a foul odor coming from the house. The police quickly identified the smell as resembling that of a decomposing body, either human or animal. Additionally, the house appeared empty but very clean, as if it had been recently tidied up. Some floorboards looked brand new, but one board had noticeable red stains. This evidence prompted the authorities to launch an investigation in search of the Michael family, but their efforts were unsuccessful. The case took a dramatic turn when, on that same day, Brandley County, Georgia, police received a disturbing report from Summerfield, located 170 miles north of the Michael family's home. Michael had crashed the family car into a concrete sewer tunnel. Although he escaped uninjured, his car was damaged beyond repair. When the police arrived, they detected a strong, repulsive odor and asked Michael about it. He reluctantly confessed to the situation. Upon searching the car, the police discovered the decomposing body of his wife, Casey. Additionally, Michael indicated where he had buried the bodies of his children. Michael was quickly arrested, and after he revealed to authorities the location of his children's burial in the woods near Highway 301 in Charlton County, a search was initiated. Investigators discovered a patch of freshly disturbed soil, and to their horror, they uncovered the bodies of Cameron, Preston, Mercalli, and Ayana. The news shocked the relatives and friends of the Casey family. Richard lost 2 sons and his ex-wife due to her relationship with Michael, while Nikki had to endure the heartbreaking task of burying her daughter and 4 grandchildren. Michael's actions had a lasting impact on the mental health of many people. One of those affected was Michael's ex-wife, Sarah. Her children had stayed at Michael's house several times after he killed Casey and were under the watch of their father, the killer. Additionally, Michael sought refuge from a hurricane at Sarah's home for several days, meaning her children were living close to him during that time. Given the brutality of Michael's actions, it is alarming to consider that he might have harmed Sarah and their other children. Fortunately, he did not, which meant that Sarah and her children were incredibly lucky. After his arrest, Michael cooperated during interrogations. He calmly answered questions without trying to mislead the police and even expressed gratitude for being caught, admitting that he felt he couldn't do anything right. He explained that his actions stemmed from a heated argument with Casey after she accused him of having an affair. Michael described how Casey lost control when she confronted him with a baseball bat and struck him. In a fit of rage, he took the bat from her and hit her several times on the head, continuing until he believed she was dead. He then placed her body in a plastic bag and hid it in a closet, cleaning up any visible blood. During this time, their 4 children were asleep in the house. Following Casey's death, Michael began fabricating stories to cover up what he had done. For weeks, he used Casey's phone to send messages to friends and family, pretending she was still alive. On August 10, 31 days after killing Casey, he decided to murder her two sons. He strangled Cameron and then, the following night, used zip ties to strangle Preston. As time went on, the hot and humid weather caused a serious issue. The bodies began to decompose. To mask the smell, Michael tried using cat litter, but it was ineffective. On August 23, after the deaths of his wife and two stepchildren, he received an eviction notice, which increased his anxiety. Unable to keep the bodies in the house any longer, he felt confused. On August 25, he took his two daughters to the local police station. Sitting with them on a park bench across the street, he tried to figure out how to turn himself in. However, his determination turned to discouragement, and when he got home, he revealed his sadistic side. That night, he drowned both of his daughters, Mercalli and Ayanna, in the bathtub. 2 days later, during a storm, he went to Jacksonville to visit his ex-wife Sarah, without revealing that there were 5 bodies in the trunk of his car. The bodies remained there for 16 days until he finally buried his children. At the time of their deaths, Casey was 32 years old, Cameron was 9, Preston was 4, Mercalli was 2, and Ayanna was just 11 months old. Michael Wayne Jones's trial began on December 8, 2022, and it seems unlikely that he will be released anytime soon. Because the murder of Casey was not premeditated, Michael will face charges of second-degree murder for her death. However, he will be charged with first-degree murder for the deaths of his children. Since he has already confessed to these crimes, he is likely to receive a life sentence without the possibility of parole. It's important to note that Florida still has the death penalty, and the autopsy reports presented in court revealed some tragic details. Cameron had a broken lower jaw at the time of his death, and a plastic zipper was found around Preston's neck. The remains of Mercalli and Ayanna were discovered in a small plastic bag, which also contained a bottle with a pacifier labeled with Ayanna's name, and a small pair of baby sandals. Casey's body was wrapped in a rug and a black and white shower curtain, and her skull showed damage consistent with trauma from a heavy blunt object, indicating she was likely struck rather than injured accidentally. During the trial, the defense argued that Michael should not face severe consequences for several reasons. First, they emphasized his troubled relationship with Casey, portraying her as a domineering woman. Second, they noted that Michael had used various banned substances during the incidents. Lastly, they shared his mental health history, which was rooted in a difficult childhood marked by physical abuse from his father and stepfather. Michael displayed unusual behaviors, such as hitting his head against walls and floors to quiet the voices in his head. It's important to mention that Casey was not entirely innocent in their relationship. Her sister described her as stubborn, aggressive, and at times cruel. Michael stated that he was frequently bullied by Casey, which added to his stress. He also claimed that the actions he took against the children were meant to keep them together with their mother, as he believed they should not be separated. The doctor and clinical psychologist found evidence that Michael came from a dysfunctional family, marked by mental and physical abuse. Despite this, the prosecution showed no mercy. However, all 5 murders occurred within 49 days, indicating that Michael had ample time to regain control of his emotions. Instead, he acted with cold calculation throughout the entire incident. Michael lied many times, such as using Casey's phone to fool many people, including Sarah, and even asking her to give a false alibi. During the trial, his ex-wife Sarah said she wanted them to hang him and end it all because she thought he didn't deserve to live another day. In Florida, Michael Wayne Jones has been convicted of first-degree murder, and if the jury agrees, he could face the death penalty. The final decision rests with Judge Circuit Anthony Taddy, who has not yet scheduled a sentencing date. However, given the circumstances, the judge is expected to render a fair judgment, whether that means sentencing Michael to death or not. His actions place him among criminals deserving of the harshest punishment. Killing your wife is horrific and unforgivable, but taking the lives of 4 innocent children is so appalling that it is almost unimaginable. During Michael's trial, Casey's sister shared the deep pain she feels over the loss of her younger sister and nephews. She eventually had to leave her job because seeing the children's clothes in the store brought her to tears. Following a nervous breakdown, she was unable to get out of bed for 6 months. The thought that her nephews and niece will never graduate, marry, or have children of their own is a constant source of torment for her, often feeling overwhelming. She believes Michael deserves the verdict the jury reached, and she hopes the judge will uphold it. On Friday, April 28, 2023, at a hearing at the Marion County Judicial Center in Ocala, Judge Anthony Taddy sentenced Michael Wayne Jones to death for the murders of 4 children. He was also credited with life in prison for the death of his wife, and was given credit for 1,322 days already served while awaiting the resolution of these cases.